Yeah, it's rewind time.
Steven Universe is a cartoon that's loaded with a ton of secrets, Easter eggs, and foreshadowing. The most popular one probably being Ronaldo's perfect prediction of the Diamond Authority.
They're here to hollow out the Earth! It's part of the Great Diamond Authority!
With a lot of people revisiting Steven Universe or experiencing it for the very first time, I thought it'd be fun to run down some of my favorite details in the show. I also want to make this a series on the channel, covering not just Steven, but all sorts of lore-driven tunes. So I'm not giving away all the juicy stuff in this video. It was decided all the way back in season 1 that Garnet would never ask questions.
Should we ask them what's going on?
I can't.
Seriously, you could count how many sincere questions she asks on one hand. Rhetorical questions like the lyrics in Stronger Than You are fine, but otherwise, she speaks exclusively in statements. Canonically, this is because Rose told her to stop asking questions surrounding her identity, as Garnet's mere existence is already the answer, instilling a ton of confidence and a strong sense of self in the fusion. Garnet herself is a statement. This factors into why Ruby and Sapphire diffused and now are only falling apart, as their existence suddenly came into question alongside everything else that accompanied the big pink diamond reveal. A legitimate question did slip through the cracks in Cheeseburger Backpack, where Garnet asked if Steven has anything in his backpack that could help them.
What? Me? What have you got?
Cheeseburger Backpack is only the 3rd episode in the series though, so the Crewniverse likely did not have that rule in place yet, especially since it was storyboarded by Rebecca and Ian themselves, so they were responsible for writing the dialogue. Garnet's also seen asking questions in external media such as comics, but you can chalk that up to the writers of these having no communication with Sugar. Aside from that, the only other time Garnet asks questions is in Steven Universe the movie, after being rejuvenated. She's as curious as a cat.
Why are you fighting? Aren't we all friends?
It conveys that Garnet is no longer herself. Until Steven snaps her back to reality, at least. Speaking of Garnet, there is so much foreshadowing surrounding her being a fusion leading up to that big season 1 finale. There are the more obvious clues, like her having 2 gems in the temple door, her giddy reaction to Stevani, and the fact that she has characteristics of a fusion, like her third eye, and larger size compared to the other gems. But there are some subtle hints as well. Whereas Amethyst, Pearl, and Steven have twinkling stars in the background of their character cards in the first intro, Garnet gets 2 shooting stars, representing Ruby and Sapphire. The first thing we see in the pilot is Garnet standing tall in front of fire and ice formations, and yes, her being a fusion was planned from the very beginning. Amethyst refers to her as G-Squad and Monster Buddies, implying she's composed of more than 1 gem. She performs with a keytar in Steven and the Stevens, which is a fusion of the piano and guitar. In Alone Together, when Amethyst remarks that fusion is hard, Garnet chimes in,
Not for me.
In The Return, Jasper refers to Garnet as a shameless display, alluding to how cross-gem fusion is frowned upon on Homeworld. And my favorite has to be in Fusion Cuisine. Let's take a look at Alexandrite diffusing back into Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl. Did you catch that? If not, let's run it back in slow motion. That's right, Alexandrite actually diffused into Ruby and Sapphire, alongside Amethyst and Pearl. Ruby and Sapphire just immediately fused back into Garnet before hitting the ground. I have a core memory of showing off this Easter egg at a con years ago, and I remember it taking so long to pause at the right moment, but when I finally got it, the room burst into applause. I miss those days. I should also mention Garnet's universe, as it has a ton of foreshadowing surrounding not just Ruby and Sapphire, but Steven's powers and the true identity of Rose Quartz. Hopper and Hoppy, who have 2 eyes and 1 eye respectively, ask Garnet if they can meet Steven, but she tells them he's not ready.
Will we get to meet him soon?
Not yet. He's not ready to learn that I have secret animal friends.
In hindsight, it's clear that Hopper and Hoppy are analogous to Ruby and Sapphire, as Garnet didn't believe that Steven was ready to meet Ruby and Sapphire prior to the events of Jailbreak. When Ringo obtains the Gem of Ultimate Power, a gem that's in the shape of a diamond, he places it into the hole in his hair in a way where the gem is forward-facing, resembling Steven and Rose's gem placement. Rotating the gem is a hint towards Rose Quartz being Pink Diamond, as she shifts around her own gem whenever she becomes Rose. Rose. Garnet's Super Saiyan moment causes her to be encased in a pink glow, which may have been alluding to Steven's pink form in Steven Universe Future. It may sound like a reach, but they had the idea for Steven's transformation pretty early on, originally calling it Perfect Steven, where his hair would resemble Rose's as opposed to his form in Future, where that's more reminiscent of pink diamonds. So I don't think it's too far-fetched that by the time they were working on Garnet's universe, they already knew Steven would eventually start glowing pink and tap into his diamond powers whenever he's distressed. Remember Mystery Girl? The woman that hit it off with Pearl in Last One Out of Beach City, that a ton of fans thought would become a recurring love interest for our beloved bird mom, and that people thought she might have been Kevin's ex Sabina since her name starts with an S? Well, she didn't just disappear after this one episode. She pops up again in the big show. You can spot her in the crowd right before Sadie Killer and the suspects perform. Guess she's really tapped into the music scene. Since this was another towny episode in the midst of the show heading towards the endgame, it's often overlooked, which is a shame because it has one of my favorite pieces of foreshadowing. They straight up spell out the climax of Reunited during the song Ghost. Sadie is a stand-in for Steven, while Buck and Jenny are blue and yellow diamond, as indicated by the color of their guitars. In this performance, Sadie is a ghost who struggles to get the people around her to notice her presence, and they only become aware of her after she tosses confetti in their face. Fast forward to Reunited, and after Yellow Diamond knocks Steven out, what happens? He ends up in the mindscape and uses his aura to grab the Diamond's attention and get them to stop fighting once they recognize Pink Diamond's presence. This is why I'm someone who appreciates the slower episodes of the show, even if they're not my favorite. Sure, they aren't always moving the plot forward. They can be boring, but you get little Easter eggs like this that you'll catch on a rewatch. And it's always cool to see what plot points the Crew-Universe had figured out long before they would come to fruition. The Big Show was the 14th episode of season 5, while Reunited is the 23rd episode, which means they knew how they wanted Reunited to end months before they started working on it. Pretty neat. The famethyst is a squad of Earth-made quartzes who are stationed at the human zoo, as they aren't all that great at being soldiers. I wish they made more appearances, especially since most of them are voiced by Michaela Dietz, so it's not like they would have had trouble getting her back in the booth. She's Amethyst! But anyways, while the famethyst first appeared in the zoo arc, they were teased at the tail end of season 3 in the episode Beta, when Peridot brings Steven and Amethyst to the Beta Kindergarten and wastes no time critiquing the gems who were created here. She points out a carnelian.
This carnelian came out sideways.
A few moments later, during Amethyst's big speech, she points out that one of the courses came out skinny.
Like this guy, and skinny up there.
Jump to That Will Be All, and two of the most unique gems we meet are Carnelian and Skinny Jasper, the same two gems who exit holes we saw in Beta. Skinny Jasper is still one of my favorite quartz designs, and her relaxed voice has always exuded a cool factor to me. If we get a new show, she has to make an appearance, I don't care how. Like Sardonyx, Sunstone is a fourth-wall breaking character, talking like a cool 90s mascot who's hosting a PSA, a la Sonic Says. But this meta aspect to the fusion also extends to the soundtrack, as the Cartoon Network new jingle is baked into their theme. Side note, I always thought Sardonyx and Sunstone's ability to break the fourth wall was a result of Garnet's future vision being amplified by fusion. Like they can see beyond timelines and are aware of entire dimensions. But that's just my interpretation. Aquamarine may have played a brief role in the story as the antagonist who would bring Steven directly to the diamonds, but her character actually conveys a lot about Era 2 gems. Unlike Era 1 gems such as Lapis and Sapphire, she's unable to use her water-based powers beyond her wings and has to rely on gem tech, i.e. her wand, just like how Peridot had to rely on limb enhancers as another Era 2 gem. Her and Eyeball's fusion, Bluebird, is able to tap into these elemental powers as she manifests an ice sword, which I assume is from the fact that Eyeball is an Era 1 gem who already had a dagger. Considering how she's a high-ranking gem, with Pearl freaking out over her presence on Earth, I think it goes to show that not all Era 2 gems are looked down upon just because they have fewer abilities. As long as they get the job done with the resources they have, they still have a shot at being celebrated by the diamonds. Her gem shape and placement is also very telling about the prevalent feeling shared amongst Era 2 gems: grief and vengeance. You see, eye drop tattoos are often associated with prison and murder. Perhaps the tatted inmate has taken a life, or one of their friends was murdered and they're seeking revenge. The latter fits Aquamarine and the whole of Era 2 perfectly, as Homeworld wants to avenge Pink Diamond. There's also the obvious association with Blue Diamond, as Aquamarine is in her court and Blue Diamond spends most of the series stuck in grief. It just goes to show how Homeworld was never able to truly move forward because the diamonds were hung up on the past. Even if Yellow repressed her feelings and said she wanted to move forward, she was adamant on seeing the Earth's destruction. She was also unable to move on. Also, Aquamarine's based off Cartman. Yeah, seriously.
So, like, what kind of went into, like, planning for their introduction?
The ideas for the characters came from Rebecca of just having these ideas for these gems, and, you know, this really small, sassy, powerful one that she initially described as, like, Cartman-like.
Yeah, it was like Eric Cartman.
Back in the show's prime, people assumed that this toy in Steven's room was based off Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII. Which makes sense, just look at him. But this actually isn't meant to be Cloud. It's Hero from RPG World, a webcomic created by series executive producer and Rebecca Sugar's husband, Ian Jones-Cordy. Hero would actually be fully animated and voiced in Ian's own show, OKKO, which dedicated an entire episode to wrapping up RPG World's story, with the final scene of the episode doubling as the final page of the comic, appearing on the comic's website shortly after the episode premiered. The Steven multiverse runs deep, folks. Ronaldo predicted the Great Diamond Authority without missing a beat. But do you guys remember when he caught the human zoo in Rising Tides Crashing Skies? After Steven explains that the giant hand ship was only there for the crystal gems, Ronaldo says,
Wait, so the hand wasn't here to snatch up humans for a human zoo?
2 seasons later, we would discover that Pink Diamond really did have a human zoo that's still up and running, and many residents of Beach City were in danger of winding up there themselves, only being saved by Steven's sacrifice. Knowing Ronaldo, he's probably salty he wasn't one of them.
So Lars is really in space? I'm the one who should be in space!
Lars has some of the best character development in the series, going from a dishonest, insecure, selfish delinquent to a noble hero who can be vulnerable with himself and the people around him, and his development can actually be tracked through the shirts he wears. In season 1, when he's not working at the Big Donut, he's seen wearing a shirt with a snake on it, a perfect reflection of his character back then, especially when it came to his relationship with Sadie. He was manipulative and untrustworthy. However, around and after the events of the new Lars, he starts wearing a shirt with a dead bird on it. Sounds morbid, but dead birds can actually symbolize impending change and having a fresh start. So it makes sense that he starts wearing this shirt full time after the new Lars, as that was the episode where he realized people really didn't like the persona he put on. They would have preferred Steven pretending to be him in his own body rather than the real deal. It was a wake-up call that something had to change, and he starts slowly growing from here on out. Then you have his skull shirt that made its first appearance towards the end of season 4, right before him and Steven get whisked away to Homeworld. Do I even have to say it? This was a pretty blunt indicator that our boy was about to die, which would happen just a few episodes later in Off Colors, before being brought back to life by Steven. From here on out, we have his Captain Lars fit in the rest of the OG series, but it's worth noting that none of his shirts in the movie or future have graphics on them, probably because there was nothing else to allude to. His development was done, and his arc was complete. So he gets boring blank shirts. No disrespect though, my guy has that shit on for real. Finally, did you notice that Cactus Steven's fight with the Crystal Gems telegraphed exactly how Steven Universe's future would end? I made a short about this last year, but it's worth repeating for anyone who didn't see that. Because Steven projects his feelings of inadequacy onto Cactus Steven, the plant starts to crash out after being discarded by Steven. Which, I don't know how Steven didn't expect that. He felt like he was being forgotten and that no one needed him anymore. So turning around and giving Cactus Steven the same treatment after dumping these heavy feelings on him was never going to lead to a happy ending. During the big battle, Cactus Steven gradually evolves into a giant monster that the gems struggle to keep at bay, until Steven realizes that fighting isn't the answer, proceeding to apologize to Cactus Steven for not giving him the love he deserves, and selling his sincerity with a big ol' hug, giving Cactus Steven the cathartic breakthrough he's been waiting for. However, Cactus Steven doesn't stay in the beach house. He decides to expand his horizons and run off into the unknown. All of this is exactly what happens to our Steven at the end of Future. He has a mental breakdown. He transforms into a giant monster that no one can beat. He's calmed down with a group hug. The squad shares some words he desperately needed to hear, and after he turns back to normal, he takes some time to himself and decides to leave Beach City, expanding his own horizons as he embarks on a new journey all by himself. And they gave all this away 10 episodes ahead of time. Incredible! Welcome to Secrets in Steven Universe, where I share my favorite details in this series, from foreshadowing to Easter eggs and behind the scenes trivia. Have you always noticed that Rose always looks sad? Well, whenever she's not pissed beyond belief. That was an intentional decision by Rebecca Sugar. If you look at the sketches for Rose's appearance in Lion 3 straight to video, Sugar wrote that Rose is always wall-eyed and sad-eyed, even when smiling. She's drenched in an infinite sadness due to her origins as Pink Diamond and everything that happened after reinventing herself. She had to carry the pain of never making amends with her abusive family while shouldering the guilt of the corrupted gems and the comrades who were shattered during the war that she started. She could never escape that sorrow, and it shows. This is also why her eyes are closed in every depiction of her in the series. Whether that be a statue or a portrait, it was an effort to hide her true emotions and to be remembered as someone better than the person she felt she was. She's one of the most divisive characters in cartoons though, so I don't know if that worked out for her. Petey is one of the more overlooked characters in the series, and for good reason. He doesn't do much, even when compared to the other townies. Despite his minimal role, however, I've always found him to be one of the more interesting side characters, as he seems to parallel Pink Diamond, just with a healthier family dynamic. The boy's name is straight up Pink Diamond's initials, so it's not exactly subtle. The two both start out wanting to get in on the family business. For Pink, it's the Great Diamond Authority. For Petey, it's Beach City Walk Fries. Pink Diamond wanted a colony but was denied such responsibility for ages, as her duties boiled down to throwing parties to celebrate the other Diamond's achievements and keeping up appearances. She was ultimately a mascot for Homeworld. Meanwhile, Petey, expressing his desires to his dad, also ends up becoming a mascot as he dons the Frybo costume. Both of them are extremely unfulfilled in this role and end up reaching similar conclusions, albeit under vastly different circumstances. After getting her own colony, only to be denied of any actual authority over it, Pink Diamond ended up reinventing herself through the persona of Rose Quartz, abandoning the Great Diamond Authority in favor of founding the Crystal Gems with Pearl. Petey still decides to part ways with the family business in favor of doing his own thing, and starting his own food truck that specializes in tater tots instead of fries. Fries and tots may be two different foods, but they both stem from potatoes. Kinda like how Pink Diamond and Rose Quartz are two separate entities, but they stem from the same gem. But again, although Pink Diamond and Petey may have similar ambitions, the major difference between the two are their family dynamics. Mr. Fryman didn't throw Petey in a mascot outfit because he didn't trust him with actual responsibilities, choosing to openly patronize him instead. He just misunderstood what Petey actually wanted, and when Petey opens up about his feelings at the end of Frybo, his dad listens. He doesn't try to force the role of Frybo onto him. He doesn't downplay his son's frustrations or punish him for speaking up. He works with his son to find a solution. The Diamonds, on the other hand, did the exact opposite. They would constantly reprimand Pink for expressing herself and shut down her pleas for more responsibility. And once they gave in to her wishes for a colony, they forbade her from setting foot onto it and continued to make choices for her, like the creation of the human zoo and refusing to cease colonization. Petey was able to prosper because of his family, whereas Pink was able to prosper in spite of her family, resulting in Petey being able to crawl out of his depression and live a moderately happy life, whereas Pink was never able to rid herself of all the negative emotions brought on by the Diamonds. Even when she became Rose Quartz and lived a somewhat peaceful life on Earth after the war, sadness still lingered within her, which is what I think the parallel is trying to get at. Family is a central theme of Steven Universe, and the series gives us an array of different family dynamics that share similar issues. Issues that are resolved by good old-fashioned communication, and it explores what happens to families who don't communicate. The Diamonds are the biggest family-centered conflict Steven had to face. Observing and helping the struggling families around him, including his own, equipped him with the necessary skills to appease the Diamonds and end their tyranny without violence. I guess getting ripped apart by White Diamond to beat the Pink allegations helped too. Petey isn't the only character who mirrors Pink Diamond's journey, however. By the end of the original series, Lars and Sadie end up becoming a duo who reflects Steven's own parents. That's right, the Ballad of Lars and Sadie parallels the Ballad of Rose and Greg, but Lars and Sadie's romance ends where Rose and Greg's began. Sorry if that sounds confusing, allow me to illuminate. As we all know, Rose abandoned a life in the cosmos in favor of reinventing herself as a rebel gem, and by the time she met Greg, she desperately wanted to be something more than a gem, something that was allowed to grow and change, a human being, which she found a way to achieve by giving birth to Steven. Lars, like Rose, put on a facade whenever the cool kids were around. He desperately wanted to be a part of their clique, yet he was incapable of being himself because he didn't like who he was. Is Is any of this sounding familiar? Failing to both carve out a new identity and embrace who he really is, Lars would finally hit a breakthrough after getting abducted by Topaz and Aquamarine. Literally being reborn on Homeworld, he doesn't want his second chance at life to be a waste. He's finally driven to break out of old habits and is able to truly find himself by becoming a rebel who opposes Homeworld. This transformation paves the way for him to truly accept himself, as when he returns to Earth, he's no longer insecure and expressing himself, opening up his own bakery after hiding his love for cooking. But after working at the bakery for a little while, he still wants to see more of the universe and heads back out into space, living in the cosmos for the foreseeable future, the opposite of Pink Diamond. Greg was someone who abandoned a mundane lifestyle and left his family behind to pursue a life of rock and roll, becoming a musician and reinventing himself as Mr. Universe. He wanted to see what was out there in the world, but once he met Rose, he realized he saw everything that he needed to see. He was ready to settle down and returned to a mundane life in Beach City, falling into a pretty basic blue-collar job as he ended up running the car wash. Sadie, on the other hand, was someone who couldn't bear the thought of living a mundane life. Working a basic job at the Big Donut was already draining the life out of her at 18. But thanks to the cool kids, she was able to come out of her shell and become a musician, starting with Sadie, Killer, and the Suspects, and later branching out further as she starts performing with her new partner, Shep. You get the idea. Lars became more like Rose, and Sadie became more like Greg, just at different points in their lives. It's also worth noting that all four of them clashed with their parents or parental figures for similar reasons, albeit in different contexts. The Diamonds were controlling towards Pink to an abusive degree, and although Greg wasn't physically harmed by his parents, he still grew up in a repressive environment and cut off contact from his mom and dad, so we can imagine they weren't all that great to him. Sadie experienced a controlling parent with Barb, but it's clear Barb meant well, and unlike the Diamonds or Greg's parents, Barb was actually able to communicate with her child and took her perspective into account, backing off and letting her make her own decisions. Lars's parents, at the very least, didn't understand him, just like how Greg, Rose, and Sadie had parents who didn't understand them. Really wish we got more development of Lars's folks. Still, this is another example of how Lars and Sadie mirror Rose and Greg, despite having the exact opposite endpoints. Something else worth noting is that Greg and Rose's relationship worked out because they communicated through all of their problems and were never ashamed of one another. Their love never existed in the dark. They were proud to be fools for each other, and they were stronger because of it. They matured together. Lars and Sadie infamously never worked through their problems. They constantly wronged each other and swept it under the rug instead of confronting each other and their emotions. Lars was ashamed of loving Sadie in public as a part of his own insecurities. The two ended up maturing the most when they were away from each other, and by the time they reunited, they realized the spark was gone and a romantic relationship was no longer feasible. Maybe if they were vulnerable with each other sooner, things would have worked out long term. But hey, at least they're really good friends. And now Lars won't have to die giving birth to a gem. That would have happened next if they stayed together, right? To wrap up the topic of Steven's friends being analogous to his gem family, let's talk about a pretty easy connection that I assume most of us made when watching this show for the first time, which is that the cool kids are pretty much the teenage versions of the crystal gems, in both appearance and personality. Buck is stoic like Garnet, they're both considered the group leader, they both speak with a similar cadence, and know how to rock a visor. Sour Cream, like Pearl, is a bit of a Poindexter, good with technology and often sticking to the rules, though they both know how to use their skills for artistic expression. They're both on the taller side, have blue eyes, and sport big pointy hairstyles that give Jimmy Neutron a run for his money. Jenny's facial features like her eyes and lips are identical to Amethyst's, especially on their model sheets. They're both carefree to the point of being a little bit of slackers, at least until Future, where they both matured over the time skip. Although Lars wanted to join the cool kids as the fourth member of the group, that honor ended up going to Sadie, who is essentially the Steven of the group. They're both musically inclined and start out a little shy, but thanks to the gems and the cool kids respectively, they're able to blossom into more outgoing, confident people. And that rubs off on both the gems and the cool kids. Brings a tear to my eye. When It Rains is centered around Steven getting Peridot out of her shell and more acclimated to the Earth, hoping that she'll be willing to reveal more information about the cluster before all hope is lost. After giving Steven the 4-on-1, Peridot is confident that she already has the key to defeating the cluster. It's Steven!
But now we have a chance. What is it? It's you, Steven.
The first time you're watching this episode, it just looks like Peridot is way in over her head. But she was actually right. Steven really was the key to defeating the cluster. The drill they built was pointless beyond getting them to the location. The only reason the cluster was able to be contained and later fight back against the diamonds is because Steven connected with it and was able to put it in a bubble. Now at the time of this episode being storyboarded, the Crewniverse obviously knew the cluster would get bubbled by Steven. It's how this arc ends. This was very much foreshadowing on their part. They even made sure to put emphasis on this line with a close-up of Peridot. Intense shadows and all. It Could Have Been Great is one of my favorite episodes to revisit whenever I'm watching the show of someone who hasn't seen it before. And it's all because of the trip to the moon base. This fed lore-hungry fans pretty well back in the day with the diamond murals, including the brief glimpse of Pinks, the mysterious orb that turned out to be for observation, and the world map that we'll cover another time. But what always puts a smile on my face is the in-your-face foreshadowing with Peridot's very ironic statements throughout this third act. First she says,
We are literally walking in the footsteps of the diamonds.
As you can see, Steven is the one leading the group to the top floor. And of course, he has Pink Diamond's gem. So at this moment, they really are walking in the footsteps of a diamond. Or foot hops? Steven's having a blast. A couple of minutes later, Peridot scolds Steven for sitting in the diamond chair, claiming that only elites can sit there.
That chair is only for the most elite gems. You can't go around sitting where an elite would sit.
Once again, this is ironic because Steven is a diamond. He's basically owed inheritance to this base. Peridot was inadvertently on a hotter streak than Ronaldo when it came to predicting the story. All of Steven's fusions wear his clothes, often mixing and matching with the other gem's outfits. This is because his clothes aren't made of light like the gem's forms, so they aren't able to turn to something entirely new like a normal gem-to-gem fusion. But wait, what about Obsidian? It doesn't look like she's wearing a pink-red star shirt, so maybe the clothes just get engulfed into the inside of her form? Surely a fusion of her stature would have torn Steven's clothes apart if she tried to wear them, right? Nope, Obsidian is actually still wearing Steven's clothes, and they reside in a very familiar spot, wrapped around the fingers and palm of Obsidian's middle left hand, which just happens to be where Steven dries his laundry at the temple, which is of course a recreation of the ultimate fusion. This also means the placement of Steven's clothes on Obsidian doubles as an homage to the main title card of the series. It's a really charming detail that'll also be kind of nostalgic for Steven if they ever need to form Obsidian in the future, as moving forward, it'll remind him of his childhood home. I also like the implication that the gems are very thoughtful when handling Steven's clothes mid-fusion. Overall, pretty wholesome. Welcome back to Secrets in Steven Universe, where I share my favorite details in the series from foreshadowing to Easter eggs and behind-the-scenes trivia. Let's break down some foreshadowing pertaining to Rose Quartz's former identity as Pink Diamond. This was a big twist that was planned since day one, that I think just about every member of the Crewniverse was looped in on, long before a single Pale Rose was even produced. I imagine the typical first day conversation was something like, welcome to the team. So Steven's mom is actually one of the 4 gem matriarchs who started a war, played Batman, and faked her own death in order to save the Earth and escape from her abusive family. Any questions?
Isabella.
To give you an idea just how much of an open secret this was around the studio, it's pretty common for productions to make some sort of shirt or jacket specifically for the crew that works on it. And in 2013, the year the show premiered, the Crewniverse had their own special shirt that featured the main 4 gemstones, isolated from their forms. And it was quite interesting that Steven's gem, which we only see from a right side up perspective in the show, looked more like a diamond than a quartz. Although the crew themselves never drew direct attention to the shirt, a couple of them made some public appearances wearing it, and theorists definitely noticed.
It's one of those things that it was such an open secret for the crew. In the writing stages for the episodes, we would put a lot of Easter eggs in, for us.
When I would see people react to episodes, I would forget that was something that they didn't already know, because it's like the missing piece that makes all of the things make sense.
Yeah. While it felt like concrete evidence that Rose was Pink Diamond, people were still able to argue against it, thanks to some bubble gems in the burning room having similar cuts to the diamonds. Lo and behold, after a single Pale Rose aired on TV and the cat was out of the bag, Joe Johnson confirmed on Tumblr that this shirt was always intended to hide the truth in plain sight. The answer was out there 5 whole years before it hit our television screens. It's crazy to think that, for half a decade, someone in LA could have just been on a quick grocery run, walked past a random Crewniverse member who just threw on this shirt to do the same thing, and been ambiguously spoiled on one of the biggest cartoons of the 2010s. And like, if you were in that position, what are you gonna do? Ask a random stranger where they got that shirt and pry if they say they work on the show? No one's doing that. It's gonna get weird fast. You're just cursed with knowledge and have to sit on it without solid confirmation. So it's almost like working on the show. Rose Quartz and Pearl really are just like Batman and Alfred, except instead of a family dynamic, it's the messiest situationship possible. The Crewniverse fully leaned into the Cape Crusaders' influence with the inclusion of Rose's armory, a hideout located in a cave where Rose stored a majority of the Crystal Gems equipment. If you aren't convinced that this was a Batman reference, and thus another clue towards Rose's former identity, there's a giant penny in the armory, something that Joe Johnston deliberately included as a nod towards Batman.
Pearl is excited to show Steven Rose's Batcave. That cave, yeah, that was basically like her secret base of operations, which is literally why we put the giant penny in there.
Onion Gang is written off as one of the most forgettable episodes of the show, as it's a rather uneventful one about Onion's friends that's a part of a long stretch of episodes without any sort of advancement on the homeworld storyline. I do think this episode holds some value, as it has one of the craziest pieces of Pink Diamond foreshadowing. Is that Frisk Undertale? Onion's friends whip up a makeshift vehicle and go on a joyride before staging a car accident that results in Garbanzo's fake death. The little dude even smears ketchup on his face to sell the bit. Somehow, Steven takes all of this at face value and really believes that Garbanzo kicked the bucket, needing to be clued in on what's really happening. This is a pretty obvious allusion to Pink Diamond staging her shattering. The vehicle Onion and friends make is the Pelican, and Garbanzo, who's wearing a pink striped shirt, is fulfilling the role of Pink Diamond. Steven, who's more gullible than usual in this instance, represents Homeworld at large. It's actually a bit of double foreshadowing as Pinto pretends to bring Garbanzo back to life, telegraphing what would happen with Steven and Lars in the next season. Pinto being the youngest and smallest of the group, just like Steven. Does any of this make the episode marginally better? Nope. It'll probably still be something everyone skips on a rewatch. But honestly, being such an overlooked episode makes the inclusion of this all the more hilarious. Two huge plot points spelled out in plain sight, and most people won't even notice it because Onion episodes aren't everyone's cup of tea. And this is a few episodes away from the much more exciting Steven's dream. During the song It's Over, Isn't It? From the iconic Mr. Greg, there's a blink and you miss it moment during the bridge where Pearl's eyes lock onto the rose in her hand as she says reinvention. On the surface, you're meant to take this as the crystal gems reinventing themselves and breaking free from their intended purposes. But coming back to this song after the Heart of the Crystal Gems arc, it's clear Pearl was referring to Pink Diamond reinventing herself and becoming Rose Quartz, something that Pearl directly had a hand in. 3 Gems and a Baby has some more in-your-face allusions to the diamonds with Greg and Steven. Greg unbuttons the middle of baby Steven's suit to let his gem breathe, causing the exposed area to be in the shape of a diamond. Pretty self-explanatory. And while Greg's blue cloth will remind people of the Virgin Mary, you could also argue that he resembles Blue Diamond, who, alongside Yellow and White, played the role of a parental figure to Pink Diamond. Although it's no secret that Greg was a way better caretaker to Steven than the Diamonds ever were to Pink. Greg and Blue Diamond would meet in the very next episode, bonding over their grief. So I definitely think they were double dipping with the imagery here. Also, the shot of Pearl almost removing Steven's gem has the exact same composition as the shot of White Diamond removing it in Change Your Mind. This was absolutely meant to be identical imagery, and it's pretty spooky. This next one is something that's highly debated on when it comes to it being intentional, but I feel like I need to include it anyway. The Say Uncle foreshadowing. Uncle Grandpa tells Steven that he should get his gem polished at least twice a year, which apparently is a rule that applies to real-life diamonds. Now, not to rain on everyone's parade, but Rebecca Sugar and Joe Johnston actually confirmed on the Steven Universe podcast that this wasn't intentional on their end, but there's a chance that one of the outline writers, Matt Burnett, co-creator of Craig of the Creek, might have slipped in.
Oh, people ask Steven's gem being polished twice a year. I haven't gotten to ask you this yet. Is that a reference to a diamond on purpose?
Polishes twice. No, I think we came up with that in the room.
Well, maybe, I wonder who, because apparently
that was a
that's
Jeff line.
Specifically a diamond.
I don't remember.
Needs that, or that's been brought up as like a huge call forward.
We did that in the room.
Man, all right. Well, I'm going
that
to.
That might have been Matt.
That
might have been Matt.
I'll have to ask Matt. I don't remember who wrote that specific line, and I also didn't know that about
diamond, so I'm not going to take credit for that.
So yeah, Sugar themselves doesn't think it's foreshadowing, but they didn't completely dismiss the idea that it could have been. If you want to roll with this being big brain foreshadowing, no one's stopping you. It's not like people are going to stop reposting this image anytime soon. Steven Universe does a great job of challenging the viewer on the truth behind Rose Quartz's identity by providing conflicting information surrounding her origins. The truth is spelled out to us all the way back in Rose's scabbard when she tells Pearl,
We can never go home.
this solidifies that Rose was, at the very least, made on Homeworld. But Season 3 onwards tries to push the narrative that she was made on Earth in episodes like Bismuth, Earthlings, and Your Mother and Mine. It's something that viewers could only buy into if they forget about that conversation in Rose's scabbard, which definitely happened, as this was pretty early in the series compared to everything else. Last but not least for this round of Pink Diamond foreshadowing is a pretty straightforward bit for Mirror Gem, when Pearl explains how the mirror works, that it sports the ability to show the user important moments throughout Era 1. All Steven sees is his reflection, as Lapis is refusing to cooperate with Pearl, prompting Steven to say,
I must be incredibly important to gem culture.
Of course, he's right, as not only does he hold Pink Diamond's gem, but he ends up changing gem society as we know it by getting through to White Diamond and ushering in Era 3, which saw Homeworld disband its armies, dismantle its colonies, and give gems the freedom to do whatever they want. All thanks to Steven. The episode's off colors in Lars's head gives us a look at Homeworld's abandoned kindergarten. Different sections of the kindergarten belong to different courts, as indicated by a line next to the corresponding diamond. Lo and behold, the off colors are hiding out in Pink Diamond section of the kindergarten, which is poetic, as not only was Pink considered to be out of place when compared to the other 3 diamonds, but also because her area seemed to have the most imperfections. Check out the exit holes. So many of them overlap with each other, implying that for one reason or another, Pink's court produced a lot of off colors, presumably those like the Rutile twins. The implications of this might be further explored in Lars of the Stars, as the original series didn't really shed light on it, but I remember noticing this detail and thinking that it fed into the narrative that Pink herself might have been considered defective or off color, that whether by coincidence or sabotage, the gems created to serve her were just as flawed as she was. Something backed up by the Beta Kindergarten and the fact that Jasper was hailed as a miracle child, the best quartz ever produced on Earth among a majority that was treated as lesser than their peers. That's just my interpretation though, and I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. Same Old World sees Lapis reveal her tragic backstory to Steven. She was assigned to help terraform Earth for a short period of time before finding herself trapped in the midst of the Gem War. Despite having no desire to fight, Lapis was struck from behind and pooped by a very familiar gem with rainbow dreadlocks and an N on their chest. That's right, our Lapis Lazuli was pooped by none other than Bismuth. Our Bismuth! And the show does absolutely nothing with this. Now to be fair, Lapis couldn't see behind her, and Bismuth was probably duking it out with plenty of Lapises during the war, but it still felt like a bit of wasted potential, considering that the two would end up getting pretty close with one another. Although the crystal gems weren't the ones who put Lapis in the mirror, Bismuth still played a role in her winding up in this situation. Having this go unaddressed feels like there's a major elephant in the room whenever the two are on screen. Maybe they can do something with it in Lars of the Stars, but I think the moment's passed. Have you ever wondered what would happen if a fusion was caught in the corruption blast? Would they unfuse and corrupt into 2 separate creatures, or would they stay together throughout the process? Well, we actually have the answer. They would corrupt as one being. We know this because Watermelon Tourmaline, aka the pufferfish from Beach Party, is actually a fusion of 2 gems according to production art. Her green and red pupils are actually 2 separate gemstones. It's hard to tell at first, but it does explain why she has 4 arms. Even if this wasn't planned all the way back in Beach Party, they still managed to make it work, as we never saw Watermelon Tourmaline get pooped when she was corrupted, so there was no gemstone they had to commit to later. Definitely one of the more subtle fusion designs. I really dig it. In Monster Reunion, we get a glimpse of Nephrite Superior, a yellow-orange curly-haired gem who commanded the gems to evacuate from Earth moments before the diamond attack. This is Hessonite, a pompous homeworld Garnet who was bestowed the light prism from Yellow Diamond and is the antagonist of the video game Steven Universe Save the Light, which is canon to the series. After a long battle with the crystal gems that concluded with Hessonite accepting that she's not a good fit for the light prism, forcing it to carry out orders that it doesn't want to do, Hessonite flees and does some soul searching. shattering. Returning in the next video game, Unleash the Light, as a reformed vigilante who allies with the crystal gems to foil her fellow Garnet's plans. Hesonite's a really entertaining character who, post-redemption, reminds me a lot of Gohan's Great Saiyaman persona from Dragon Ball, and I really hope she pops up in Lars of the Stars, as she'd be a great ally for the off-colors to have. It's the best way to get her on people's radar, as the light games have been delisted and thus aren't nearly as accessible as they used to be. Even though the ultimate crystal gem fusion, Obsidian, didn't appear until the final episode of the original series, a lot of fans already figured out that their weapon would be a giant anime sword all the way back in season 1. How? Well, everyone already pieced together that the temple depicted a fusion of the whole team after Giant Woman introduced the concept, but Obsidian's weapon of choice made a couple of appearances in Bubble Buddies and Ocean Gem. It can be inferred that the statue was originally holding a giant replica of the sword, but eventually this prop fell into the ocean as a few of the statue's arms eroded away with time. So when Steven and Connie are navigating through the water while stuck in Steven's bubble, the duplicate sword can be spotted in the background, although it's only a glimpse. We later get a much clearer view of the sword in all its glory after Lapis steals the ocean, as it's spotted directly to the east of the temple. This show is always playing the long game. Even now, there are things in the original series, the movie, and in future that probably won't be elaborated on until Lars of the Stars, from the origins of the diamonds to Pink's lost treasures. Rebecca Sugar has to be insanely patient, man. Sitting on this stuff throughout the course of a decade is not easy. Pink Diamond made Pearl vow to never speak about what really happened to her, that the two staged her shattering in order to end the war and deter Homeworld from colonizing Earth. Due to this command, Pearl's hands involuntarily cover her mouth whenever she's at risk of divulging information. But how many times did this actually happen in the series? Because there are a lot of instances where Pearl covers her mouth, but that doesn't mean it's because she's about to spill the beans. For example, she covers them and it could have been great when the gems see what a fully colonized Earth would look like, and she does it in Bismuth when Steven reunites the blacksmith with the rest of the team. Neither of those had anything to do with Pink's fake demise. So when did the crew do this with the intent of Pearl hiding a major secret? Well, the first time appears to be in season 3's Back to the Moon. After Eyeball claims that she saw Rose shatter Pink Diamond, Steven turns to Garnet and Pearl, the latter of whom immediately covers her mouth and starts shaking. This one is pretty blatant, as Eyeball doesn't realize she's spouting nonsense, but Pearl does. And as much as she wants to come clean at this very moment, she simply can't, which just leads Steven to believe that his mom really did abandon the Crystal Gems moral code and claim a diamond's life in order to end the war. The next instance is in Steven's dream. Pearl covers her mouth after Steven inquires about the Pelican and laments that the gems said they'd tell him everything moving forward, only to go back on their word as soon as something Pink Diamond related pops up. With the Pelican being the site where Pink staged her shattering, it'd be hard for Pearl to talk about it without coming clean. So, her hands keep her silent. At the end of I Am My Mom, Steven reveals himself as Rose Quartz and surrenders to Homeworld. As he's being taken away in Aquamarine's ship, Pearl cries out his name before involuntarily covering her mouth. She was ready to tell the truth out of sheer desperation, wanting to protect Steven at any cost. But alas, her vow forbade her from taking any action. It's actually really sad to think about, especially because she was probably blaming herself for Steven surrendering. The 2017 San Diego Comic-Con poster features the crystal gems paralyzed with fear as the diamonds loom over them. Lo and behold, Pearl's covering her mouth here too. This poster was for season 5 in particular, so the Crewniverse was definitely alluding to the events of A Single Pale Rose. Last but not least is Gemcation, which is the most on the nose Pearl's vow has ever been since it's the last time it happens before the big reveal. Pearl tries to force herself to explain everything to Steven, only to find herself at war with her own body. Not that it really matters to Steven, as all of his attention is on Connie, who's gone ghost on the boy. It definitely seems like they didn't iron out the idea of Pearl covering her mouth whenever she tries to talk about Pink Diamond until season 3, as prior to this, it was already a trait of hers, but it was something she did when she was distressed in general, as opposed to only talking about Pink. Last summer, I explored every timeline where Dipper and Mabel from Gravity Falls died, and ever since then, I wanted to do the same kind of deep dive for other animated series. And you already know Steven Universe had to be next in line. The happy ending Steven and his friends achieved often causes fans to forget that the Crystal Gems had a run-in with death many, many times. So today, I want to run through every timeline where the Crystal Gems died, or at least lost against Homeworld. detailing the consequences of every scenario as a result. With the help of future vision, or I guess past vision, I'm going to give you all the answers. The first timeline we have is actually pretty early on in the series, with the laser light cannon bad ending, where the Red Eye was rapidly approaching Earth with the goal of monitoring any potential gem activity. If Steven failed to retrieve the light cannon, this escapade could have had two negative outcomes. One, it collides with the planet and kills everyone as it wipes Beach City off the map, which the gems were afraid of happening, dooming the planet as Steven couldn't connect with the cluster and prevent it from emerging, which would hand Homeworld an unstoppable geo-weapon. Or two, it doesn't collide with Earth and instead simply detects that there are at least 5 gems on the planet, and that's only if it failed to pick up on the corrupted and imprisoned gems, something that would probably bump up the number to an alarming count for Homeworld. With direct confirmation that gems are still present on Earth, the grief-stricken Diamonds would have either sent soldiers to bring the crystal gems to them and subsequently have them shattered, or they would have just shown up themselves to finish the job. Either way, the crystal gems would have been cooked long before Steven knew the truth about his mom, and thus would have lacked his trump card of, hey, I'm basically Pink Diamond, to get the other diamonds to back off. Although we don't know the Red Eye only observes a number of gems present at a location, or if it can detect specific types of gems. If it's the latter, then it's possible it would have scanned Steven as Pink Diamond, which could have led to an even messier situation, being mistaken for his mom when he only had a fraction of the character development, getting taken back to Homeworld and raised by the Diamonds, with the gems being spared thanks to being his friends, but Garnet can no longer exist. Ruby and Sapphire are diffused full-time and separated. Amethyst is stationed at the zoo, and Greg is kept as a pet. Unfortunately, Connie has yet to meet Steven, so she's probably doomed. The Earth is either completed as a colony, or the Diamonds decide to proceed with the cluster, destroying the planet as a whole. The crystal gems cease to exist. All the corrupted gems are lost with the planet, and Steven is forced to act as his mom for the rest of eternity. Yeah, bad ending. Next up, we have the serious Steven bad ending. Steven has some close calls inside the pyramid, namely when he almost fell into lava before being rescued by Garnet. If her future vision failed in this moment and she didn't catch him, this would have been little old Steven's final adventure. Steven dying prior to the events of an indirect kiss means that Rose's fountain would have never been reactivated, so if Garnet, Amethyst, or Pearl would have had their gems cracked after this point, it would have been game over. He also would have never met Connie or freed Lapis. A ton of significant events would have never happened. But we'll touch on all of that throughout the video, don't worry. Side note, I've always found it interesting how all the gems survived the temple's explosion at the end without the use of Steven's bubble. So Many Birthdays was one of the first episodes to really signal to the audience that this show was capable of going to some dark places. As Steven himself acknowledges in Growing Pains, this was a traumatic event in his childhood as he almost turned so old that he died. There's a timeline where if Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl weren't able to piece together that his gem is reacting to his mental state, he would have continued to feel so old and unlike himself that he died right then and there. Dead Steven. By the way, I do think if Steven dies of old age, his gem half will cease to exist as well. I know there's some theories out there that when Steven passes of old age, Pink Steven will emerge and keep going, yet you have to remember that both of them make up Steven, and he was only on the verge of death here because of how his gem responded to his state of mind. Pearl even believes that being half human gives him an expiration date. Sure, he could live for thousands of years, but the day will still come where Steven Universe passes away. When Steven is on his deathbed, his elderly body will communicate to his gem that it's time to go, or maybe reboot into a new identity that's different from both Pink Diamond and Steven, kinda like the Avatar of gems. The events of Steven the Sword Fighter are another deeply traumatic event for Steven, as he basically witnessed Pearl die, getting stabbed in the back by her own Hollow Pearl that stayed behind after she pooped, which may have delayed Pearl's regeneration. I know Pearl takes her time reforming, but I always felt like that was open-ended. Regardless, we're lucky that things shook out in Steven and Pearl's favor, as it's likely Hollow Pearl could have killed both of them if circumstances were different. The fact she even pooped her creator shows that Hollow Pearls aren't designed designed to go easy on comrades. After all, they were likely utilized the most during the Gem War. Their opponents were trying to shatter them. So I don't find it too far-fetched that Hollow Pearl's capable of the same thing. We know Pearl isn't above going for the gem after all. And Pearl says in Sworn to the Sword that Hollow Pearl was recalibrated to be less lethal since she was training 2 human kids. There's a timeline where Steven reacted differently to Hollow Pearl, trying to best her in combat instead of just trying. And that would have caused Hollow Pearl to continue the fight and put Steven 6 feet under. I do think Garnet and Amethyst's presence also gave Steven some extra protection, as they would have cleared Hollow Pearl if she tried to hurt him. But if they had their hands tied elsewhere, dealing with a corrupted gem or just goofing off around town while Pearl trained Steven solo, forget about it! They're both dead! And Pearl getting killed means that the truth about Pink Diamond is never revealed. Lion 2 the movie saw Steven and Connie activate a training robot in Rose's armory that shot deadly element-based projectiles. This robot pursued them after they retreated to Beach City, and they were only able to stop it because Lion summoned Rose's sword at the perfect moment. This was insanely lucky. If Lion was struck before he summoned the sword, or just didn't manifest it in a short amount of time, there would have been no way for Steven and Connie to stop the robot, as Steven wasn't adept at summoning his shield. Even when they had the sword, they could have messed up any of these swings and gotten themselves killed. No one was around to help them. Well, except like Jane, but what is she gonna do? Steven and especially Connie getting killed would land the gems in hot water for leaving them unsupervised. It would become a huge story in the news, and they might have even gotten exiled from Beach City, gems being branded as a threat, and leading to the government keeping a closer eye on them. An indirect kiss recounts another severely traumatic event for Steven, as Amethyst cracked her gem and was on the verge of shattering unless Steven found a way to heal her. And he didn't realize that his healing powers worked differently from his mother's, possessing healing spit instead of healing tears. Rose's fountain seemed to activate in response to Steven's emotional distress, which to me says that timing was kind of everything here. There's a timeline where Steven didn't react the way he did when he did. Amethyst would have been doomed as the fountain wouldn't have activated. Amethyst alone kicking the bucket has long-term ramifications, as Steven and Peridot wouldn't have been able to defeat Jasper down the road, since Smoky Quartz couldn't have existed. Amethyst no longer being in the picture also means that the gems wouldn't have been able to escape the zoo unscathed, as the famethyst wouldn't have viewed the crystal gems favorably, opting to stop the gems from escaping out of fear of retaliation from Holly Blue Agate. The whole script would have been flipped. Ocean Gem has a couple of bad ending timelines that are worth exploring. Right off the bat, there's already a scenario where Greg took too long to hop into the van when Lapis was drowning Connie, causing the poor girl to get killed. I also imagine if Steven's healing powers failed when Lapis relied on them, she may have gotten enraged and resumed the battle, overwhelming the team. Let's also imagine a timeline where Steven didn't have the kind of relationships he had with the crystal gems, but instead, their dynamic was more akin to Pink and the Diamonds, where he was definitely neglected and treated as an inferior. Maybe Greg's not around to instill empathetic life lessons onto Steven. That all would lead to Steven treating Lapis's mirror differently, getting frustrated whenever Lapis chooses not to speak through the mirror, verbally mistreating the mirror, and pulling Lapis's gem out in an attempt to get the mirror to work. Kinda like blowing on a video game cartridge that won't load. But before he can put the gem back into the mirror, it shatters and frees Lapis, where she would have pulled the same scheme to get back to Homeworld and walk away from the battle as the clear winner, bringing the bubble crystal gems back with her to prove her innocence. Space Race is another episode where Steven experiences a traumatic event, and there's absolutely a timeline where things went from bad to worse for him. Steven and Pearl are in grave danger as their makeshift spaceship begins to fall apart as they approach the edge of Earth's atmosphere. There's a world where Pearl didn't listen to Steven's plea to abandon ship, or came to her senses when it was already too late, leading to the two getting caught in the implosion, which Greg would have witnessed, traumatizing him for life. Once again, no Steven pretty much dooms the crystal gems when it comes to both the diamonds and the cluster. No Pearl means the truth about Pink Diamond never comes to light. And no hitting the subscribe button means you won't stay in the loop with all things animation. And that would be tragic. Avoid that timeline at all costs. Island Adventure. If Lars and or Sadie were killed by the invisible gem terrorizing them on Mask Island, Lars would have never been taken to Homeworld, which means the off-colors would have wound up shattered in the abandoned kindergarten, and Stevonnie would have never been to the Jungle Moon, potentially causing Steven to never find out the truth about his mom. That's right, Lars is a pretty vital character. It sounds silly, but there's a timeline where the events of Watermelon Steven ended in certain death for Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl. The crystal gems were getting pummeled by the Watermelon Stevens, and the violence only stopped because of Baby Melon's sacrifice. If it wasn't for him, the crystal gems would have been reduced to shards. Now you may be thinking, the Watermelon Stevens can't be that strong because they couldn't even touch Malachite. But let's not forget, not only do fusions get a noticeable boost in strength, but Malachite in particular is a fusion of two pretty powerful gems. I mean, does her size not speak for herself? You could argue the gems could have just fused into Malachite against the Watermelons if the situation was that dire, and I agree. But from what we saw in the episode, the melons were keeping them separated, which prevented the chance for Alexandrite to form. Don't mess with the melons, man. Warp Tour is worth touching on, as although the gems weren't in any mortal danger, Steven dying prior to the events of this episode would have an insane impact on the timeline. Peridot restoring the galaxy warp would have never been detected by the gems, which means Homeworld would have had instant access to the planet, and the crystal gems would have never learned about the cluster. More Homeworld gems may have arrived on the planet to investigate the status of the cluster and the presence of any remaining crystal gems, which obviously wouldn't have worked out in the team's favor. They barely managed to evade Homeworld in the proper timeline with the few advantages they had. But also consider, if Steven dies at any point after Rose and Gem but before Warp Tour, Homeworld would have interrogated Lapis and could have brought more gems with them. The episode Future Vision is one of those super morbid, yet absolutely hilarious episodes, as Garnet foresees the many ways in which Steven could die throughout it. Choking to death on fry bits, falling down manholes, food poisoning, wasp stings, all possible futures that Garnet foresees, yet Steven avoids.
Do I choke on a pickle?
You don't choke on a pickle.
That means something else happens with the pickle.
But the most significant one would have to be at the very end of this episode. If Garnet didn't have a moment of vulnerability, something that stemmed from the growth of their relationship, Steven would have been struck by lightning and died, which means Garnet probably would have never came out of her shell. And since gems are supercomputers at their core, and Yellow Diamond's aura and destabilization blasts resemble electricity, I do wonder if a lightning strike could completely fry a gem and prevent them from working properly. And in Steven's case, it would just straight up kill him. Pretty bad. Winter Forecast also showcases multiple timelines where Steven, Connie, and Greg die in car accidents while trying to get Connie home during a snowstorm, including one where they crash into Connie's dad, Doug. All these end up being future visions that Garnet passed on to Steven, but it's crazy how many times he evaded death from scenarios that are both grounded in reality and are very obviously ungrounded. Call him Hannah Montana because he has the worst of both worlds. The Return is another episode of a timeline that's a pretty straightforward bad ending. If Steven didn't use his shield at the right time against the hand ship's blast, the entire team would have been obliterated. The cluster then emerges a couple of months later, and the Earth is doomed. As for Jailbreak, if Garnet didn't get the chance to reform, or if she lost a fight with Jasper, the crystal gems wouldn't have been able to take control of the situation. Instead, they would have been taken to Homeworld, put on trial in front of the diamonds, and swiftly sentenced to shattering. And the truth about Pink Diamond would have never been revealed. Friendship saw Garnet and Pearl reconcile after the Sardonyx fiasco, in a moment where they really needed to patch things up, lest they be killed by Peridot's trap. In a timeline where they never patched things up and got shattered in the ship, Alexandrite would have never been formed against Malachite, and Steven would have had a much harder time catching Peridot. Odds are, this is another timeline where the cluster forms and the Earth is destroyed. Message received. Yellow Diamond detonating the communicator probably could have killed everyone if they didn't dispose of it in time. Of course, the cluster wasn't dealt with yet, so the Earth is
gone.
It's wild to think about, but if the events of Watermelon Steven didn't unfold the way they did, we would have seen the bad timeline for Super Watermelon Island. You see, Alexandrite only won the battle against Malachite because the Watermelon Stevens managed to distract the toxic fusion momentarily. The crystal gems were on the verge of losing prior to this intervention. Again, I love how Steven is always the key to survival in some way, shape, or form. His influence is felt throughout the entire story. With Alexandrite defeated, Malachite finishes them off right then and there. As a result, Lapis and Jasper never unfuse. With Jasper's influence, the fusion doubles down and goes on a rampage across Earth until Lapis is able to regain control. If she ever does. The Ruby squad would arrive in the following days in search of Jasper. Knowing they stand no chance against the fusion, they opt to alert Yellow Diamond about Malachite's existence, accusing Lapis of forcing Jasper into the fusion and keeping the kindergarten courts who could in a hostage situation, which isn't too far off from the truth. In response, Yellow Diamond comes to Earth and separates the fusion apart by force, sentencing Lapis to shattering and retrieving the cluster, destroying the Earth in the process. On the topic of the cluster, let's talk about the bad ending timeline for Gem Drill. In this timeline, Steven fails to communicate with the cluster and help them form a bubble. He and Peridot likely would have been killed as it formed. I imagine the whole body also would have formed instead of just an arm, so chances are, the crystal gems wouldn't have been able to take it on without obsidian, and they would have gotten themselves shattered, dooming humanity and the planet. Steven Floats is a pretty comical episode, but there's a timeline where his greatest fears came to fruition, where, if he was unable to get a grip on his powers and descend, he would have starved to death and have his remains rain upon Beach City. Also consider all the horrific things that could have happened while he was trapped in the sky, colliding with an airplane, getting struck by lightning, and so on. Despite the jokes, this was a pretty horrific situation for the kid to be in. Alone at Sea has a pretty straightforward bad ending timeline. Jasper was determined to shatter Steven, as she believed Steven was getting in the way of Malachite's rebirth. If it wasn't for Lapis coming in with the Smash Bros finisher, Greg would have seen his son get murdered before his very eyes. And if Lapis had come to Jasper's plea for fusion, the entire boat could have been destroyed with Greg and Steven on board, which, at the very least, would have killed Greg. Moral of the story? Be glad Lapis is on our side. Crack the Whip saw Amethyst give it her all to defeat Jasper, only to be overwhelmed by the devastating combo of strength and shit-talking. There's a timeline where if Stefani didn't spring into action in the nick of time, Jasper would have finished what she started and shattered Amethyst into pieces. Stefani wouldn't have held back after defeating Jasper, poofing her instead of letting her retreat. But again, no Amethyst means no bond with the famethyst. It's a certified bad ending. Bismuth vs. Steven was one of the most stressful moments in the entire series, and if Steven didn't strike Bismuth with Rose's sword, she likely would have shattered him with the breaking point, destroying his gem and ending his life, removing any hope for the corrupted gems to be healed or for the diamonds to end their tyranny. But this timeline gets messier. If Bismuth comes back for the gems and tries to hide Steven's death or owns up to it, it's not ending well for her. For Bismuth to be the one who survives this fight, she's not walking away with any meaningful character development. She'll just double down on her beliefs that Rose is Steven and Rose is a monster. Imagine her explaining that rationale to gems who know Steven isn't Rose. They'd be disturbed and devastated, which would inevitably spiral into a fight. Any outcome would be pretty disastrous. I do think there's a slim chance she could best all three gems and give them an ultimatum: comply or die. To which I see the three obviously choosing death, getting shattered by the breaking point. If the gems overwhelm Bismuth and manage to poof her, they're still pretty screwed about Steven, being forced to bide their time before the diamonds inevitably do them in, while also mourning the loss of family and a friend. Bubbled. There's a timeline where Eyeball manages to kill Steven in space before removing his gem from his lifeless body, causing her to realize that she's made a grave mistake as she's holding the gem of Pink Diamond. From there, the crystal gems might find Eyeball the roaming eye, horrified to discover that Steven has been murdered before tossing the ruby back into space. The sight of Pink Diamond's gem would cause Garnet and Amethyst to piece everything together, which would allow Pearl to break her vow of silence and explain why Pink Diamond invented the persona of Rose Quartz. Eyeball and the rubies would manipulate the crystal gems into returning to Homeworld, claiming that Eyeball would own up to murdering Pink Diamond. However, Eyeball would obviously betray them, accusing the crystal gems of holding on to Pink Diamond's remains, and that she was just lucky enough to retrieve it. The diamonds, buying the ruby's story, shatter Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, and take Pink Diamond's gem, rebooting it into a new incarnation that they try to assume control over once again. That's dark. Know Your Fusion almost led to one of the more absurd timelines where the crystal gems perish. If they failed to exit Sardonic's room before it collapsed, they likely would have ceased to exist alongside it. The only way to recreate the room would be to have Sardonyx fusing, which can't happen if Garnet and Pearl are wiped from existence. So the core team, gone in a flash. which is pretty wild to think about, and also makes the temple feel like a bit of a death trap. But on that note, would y'all be interested in a full video on the temple and the lore behind gem rooms, where I try to make sense of it all? Let me know in the comments down below. In the episode Steven stream, Garnet originally foresaw a timeline where she went with Steven to Korea and was spotted by Blue Diamond. This led to Blue Diamond hunting down the other crystal gems to their home base, and judging by their battle in Reunited, they wouldn't have stood a chance. Blue Diamond would have either shattered them herself, especially once she recognized Garnet from thousands of years ago, or she would have brought the gems back to Homeworld so they could be publicly humiliated and sentenced to a shattering. That will be all as where the gems were really playing with fire by escaping the zoo while the diamonds were still at that exact location. There's gotta be timelines where Steven and Greg slipped up while leaving the bubble room, getting recognized by the diamonds, or where Sapphire's anxiety got the best of her and exposed her position. Honestly, I think Yellow would have just shattered them on the spot, especially with emotions already being high in this moment. Let me also once again bring up that if Amethyst wasn't in the picture, the Famethyst probably wouldn't have been looking out for them, and thus sided with Holly Blue Agate. Also, if Blue Diamond discovered that Greg was actually with the crystal gems, she might have killed him personally, as she would have seen the alignment as a betrayal, regretting opening up to Greg when she was in Korea, before, you know, abducting him. Let's shift gears to timelines revolving around Lars and the off-colors. If it wasn't for Lars' sacrifice, something that was the accumulation of his arc, the shattering Robonoids would have overwhelmed Steven and the off-colors, eventually taking all of them out. Lars never dying and being brought back to life means that Steven could never escape Homeworld. He would have died on this planet without ever seeing his friends and family again. Then there's Lars the Stars and Jungle Moon. If Lars and the Off-Colors had stolen any other ship or dealt with any other Emerald, the ship they were on would have been blown to smithereens instead of Emerald intentionally missing it because of her connection with the vehicle. Stefani's also extremely lucky that they survived the ship crashing into the Jungle Moon, as there are numerous points where their life was at stake. Steven dying at any point during Season 5 means that you can kiss the healed gems and Era 3 goodbye. Now let's tackle the bad timeline for Reunited, as it's truly insane how a very specific set of circumstances led to the crystal gems coming out of their battle with Blue and Yellow Diamond alive. Their entire key to survival was the information that Rose Quartz was really Pink Diamond. Let's say Steven never went to the moon base. This event never occurring is pretty much a death sentence for the entire planet. If Ronaldo never woke up Steven to tell him about the barn on the moon, Steven would have never had that dream flashback that caused him to put Pearl on the spot about what really happened when Pink Diamond was shattered. This means Ruby and Sapphire never would have split up, they never would have gotten married, which means Bismuth would have never been unbubbled, weakening the team in numbers, and preventing the Diamond Hand ships from being repaired if the gems somehow survived the battle. Yet, the Diamonds still would have shown up regardless for both the cluster and the chance to confront the crystal gems. No moon-based visit also means Lapis would have never shown up to the brawl, even if she saw the Diamonds head to Earth all the way from the moon base. She wouldn't have had that cathartic talk with Steven that persuaded her to come back home. And Lapis was pivotal in keeping Blue Diamond at bay, even if they were still unable to do much to her in the long run. It's safe to say that the crystal gems would have lost the battle much sooner, and even if Yellow Diamond still KO'd Steven and sent him to the mindscape, what is he going to do if he doesn't know that he can sway them to his side? Everyone would have gotten their asses kicked and subsequently killed. And let's say Steven still went to the moon base, but when he confronted Pearl, he still didn't learn the truth for one reason or another. I think the only thing that changes is Lapis finding the courage to show up and brawl. As long as Steven doesn't know that he has Pink Diamond's gem, the outcome will never be in their favor. Change Your Mind had a few close calls for our heroes. Let's say Steven's gambit of fusing with the gems to save them failed. All their gemstones would have dropped to the ground and shatter on impact. And if Sunstone didn't form when they did, everyone would have been crushed by the Diamond Mech. There's also Steven being thrown on the brink of death after White Diamond pulled out his gem. If his human and gem half didn't fuse back together in time, his human half would have died. But would his gem half die? Well, I do suspect that his gem relies on his human half to an extent, evident with Gem Steven being devoid of any personality. While there is a chance Gem Steven would have just continued to exist as an unstoppable force who travels the world emotionless in search of a new purpose, there's also a chance that after a while, his form just collapses and the gemstone is unable to generate a new form. It relied on Steven's human half to function, which is why the two halves desperately sought after fusing back together to survive. But let's say the gem half could survive on its own. What if White managed to zap Pink Steven? Well, while I don't think she can make a White Steven mold her image into Pink Diamond, I do think she could utilize the gem half as a powerful weapon to conquer new planets and prevent gems from stepping out of line, turning Steven into something that goes against everything he stands for. The crystal gems would remain under White's influence for the foreseeable future, being used as examples for what could happen if you choose to defy Homeworld's rules. Again, dark. Of course, I gotta talk about Steven Universe the movie, as it's very easy to identify a timeline where Steven never had his epiphany, and his words to Spinel fell on deaf ears. He was already weak and drained himself the more he used his powers, appearing physically ill. So it wouldn't have taken much for Spinel to beat the remaining life out of him and destroy the planet, killing countless lives in the process. In the aftermath, if she didn't go down with the planet, she more than likely would have been destroyed by the diamonds, who re-enter the cycle of grief, slowly reversing all the progress made on Homeworld. Of course, we can't forget that Sapphire foresaw a future where Ruby was shattered during the destruction of Bismuth's scaffolding, a devastating loss that probably would have derailed Steven's whole mission to return the gems back to normal, which would have ensured Earth's demise at the hands of Spinel and her injector. Winding down, we have volleyball, which almost saw a bad ending where the two Pearls were rejuvenated by the show. Now, this wouldn't have been as much of a death sentence for Pearl, as we know she can get her memory back, but I think volleyball would have been a lost cause. She essentially would have been reborn as another Pearl designed to serve Pink Diamond in particular, which would have driven Steven crazy. Last but not least, we have I Am My Monster. If Connie never convinced everyone to give Steven the reassurance he needed, he would have never turned back to normal. Committing to the role of the monster, he destroys Beach City. Their best solution would have been another powerful fusion that involves Lapis, so that they can restrain him underwater for as long as possible, keeping their Godzilla in a cage. Which would have been a very depressing ending for Steven, losing his sense of self and being denied freedom by the same people he helped in their journey of self-discovery. And if he ever breaks free, the planet wouldn't have much time before it was demolished. Our beloved hero going down in infamy as a villain. A force of disaster. And there you have it. Every timeline where the crystal gems either lost a battle or their lives. Do you agree with these scenarios, or do you envision something a little different? Let us know in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going over on Instagram and Twitter at @AllStrikeVox and at RoundtableVids. Annecy's over, and they didn't announce a new Steven Universe. Oh wait, never mind! Welcome back to Crystal Clear. That's right, I said it in the big 25 because I'm AllStrikeVox, and the Steven Universe spinoff just got revealed at Annecy Film Festival 2025. Ooh. I'm doing this off the cuff. I don't like how that last 5 came out. So if you've been following my year-long speculation on a brand new Steven Universe series coming to Amazon Prime Video, then congratulations! I did not waste your time because that's exactly what's happening. And it is the headliner of all the new announcements Cartoon Network unveiled this year. Cartoon Network Studios is expanding the beloved Steven Universe franchise with a brand new series, Steven Universe Lars of the Stars, now in development for Prime Video. The announcement was made Wednesday during the Warner Bros. Animation, Cartoon Network Studios, and Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe showcase at the Annecy International Animation Film Festival by Steven Universe creator Rebecca Sugar. Executive produced by Sugar alongside her partner and OKKO Let's Be Heroes creator Ian Jones-Cordy, Steven Universe Lars of the Stars will follow up on the original show, tracking fan-favorite character Lars Barriga, described as an eternal teenager and space outlaw. According to the official description, the sequel series will chart Lars and his pirate crew as they smuggle contraband, evade the authorities, and uncover the darkest secrets of the fallen Gem Empire. The original Steven Universe became a cultural phenomenon during its 2013 to 2020 run, earning a Peabody Award for its storytelling, diversity, and emotional depth. This new chapter promises to explore the past, present, and future of the Steven universe, deepening the lore of the series that redefined modern animation. Before sharing her exciting news, Sugar emerged from the assembled audience to perform a new original song that she wrote for the upcoming second season of Cartoon Network Studios' popular Adventure Time spinoff, Adventure Time Fiona and Cake. Her performance was part of a larger showcase by producer and showrunner Adam Muto, who offered an early look at season 2 of Fiona and Cake, which will take place more in Fiona's world and less anew, although Huntress Wizard will have an expanded role in the show's second season. After Sugar graced the room with a stunning live version of her song Part of the Madness, a banger by the way, she recalled being asked by Muto to write a song for Simon Petrikov, which would show that, while happy he has regained his sanity, Also hints that he misses being the Ice King anew. I said, yeah, I do, because that's how I feel. That's how I feel about this world and these characters, Sugar explained before breaking the biggest news of the day, and perhaps this year's entire festival. I really miss my world, and I really miss my characters too. So I'm co-creating with Ian Jones-Cordy a new Steven Universe series, she went on, eliciting the biggest crowd reaction of the day. And so far, that's all we know about this brand new series. Honestly, I know this is gonna have some mixed reaction amongst fans. There are people who never cared for Lars, even after he became pink. There are a lot of people who wanted a sequel to be focused on Steven or Connie. But if you ask me, Lars of the Stars was always the most perfect candidate for a spinoff. The episode itself felt like a spinoff. I remember way back when season 5 was airing, oh, I don't know, this is giving spinoff vibes. And it felt really obvious to me that the crew wanted to make a spinoff. It just wasn't in the cards. And I think for a lot of Steven Universe fans, even if they don't realize it, this is by far the best option for a spinoff. What were the biggest complaints about Steven Universe? Oh, I'm tired of the Steven perspective. Oh, I'm tired of all the townie filler. Oh, I want to see more of Homeworld. I want to see more gems. I want to see more of space. Well, guess what, buddy? We're out of the Steven perspective, and Lars's whole shtick now is space. This is exactly what a lot of people wanted. I'm just saying.
You just asked for specifically that.
Now, just because it's focused on Lars and the off-colors doesn't necessarily mean that the crystal gems will be absent, like, at all. I would actually completely expect them to make appearances throughout this show. I don't know if you guys have seen Fiona and Cake. I'm going to imagine a lot of people have since there's a lot of overlap, but I imagine that Lars of the Stars will use it as a blueprint of sorts. Despite that show being focused around alternate universe versions of Finn and Jake, we still get to see just about everyone in that show. Now, when it comes to the Adventure Time we know, it was only Simon, Betty, Finn, and the Lich. But we still got plenty of Princess Bubblegum and Marceline throughout the multiverse. I imagine we're going to get the exact same thing here, especially when the plot really kicks off, because while I love the off-colors, they don't seem to have fans like that. So it makes perfect sense that we'll get an episode with Pearl, an episode with Garnet, an episode with Peridot, an episode with Lapis, basically like Steven Universe Future. All the gems will pop up and get their own dedicated episodes within the larger story. And speaking of that story, we're finally going to get the Diamond origins. Back in 2020, when the final art book dropped, End of an Era, Sugar redacted information about the Diamond's origins. It was clearly something she was saving in her back pocket. And around the time Future was ending, she revealed that she was originally going to make the season about gem origins, but decided to pivot to closing out Steven's story. And I always thought that might have been a resource thing. Like, they had less episodes in a normal season, and it felt like they were given way less money since we were getting a lot of episodes that only had like 2 voice actors in them. They couldn't even afford to bring Bismuth's original actress back, unless that might have been like a scheduling conflict thing, but either way, it felt like they didn't have as much money to go around. So they decided to keep the gem origins under lock and key until they could use it for a later story. This is that story. And with this being about the off-colors, I imagine that we're finally going to see the Rhodonite origin story. For those who don't know, Sugar revealed long ago that they had an idea for Future, where Peridot would create a machine that would show how many times a gem had been rejuvenated. Rhodonite would discover that they've been rejuvenated about 27 times. Because the ruby and pearl she's composed of kept falling in love, so their Morganite kept resetting them over and over again, but each time they would find their way back to each other, back in love. But Sugar said the idea felt too ambitious for just an 11-minute episode, and Future has no half hours, so they just scrapped the idea. I imagine since she explained the original concept, it's going to be significantly reworked here, but I still think we can expect to see it nonetheless. Also, we're on Prime Video now. Steven Universe is rubbing shoulders with Invincible and Has-Been Hotel. This will more than likely be an adult animated series like Fiona and Cake. Now, Fiona and Cake doesn't go all out. It's definitely not on the level of something like Invincible, but there is blood, they do swear here and there, and they be popping bottles. The new regular show also seems as if it'll be geared towards adults, as it's airing on Adult Swim in Canada. So it seems like the new era of Cartoon Network is just bringing back their old hits, but aging them alongside the audience who grew up with all these shows. Which honestly, I think is a good call for this generation in particular, because all of these shows felt like they were holding themselves back for the rating. That added a lot of charm to some of these shows, but at the same time, both Adventure Time and Steven Universe wanted to dig into some really heavy themes. And while I appreciate that you can find a way to make that palatable for a kid audience, knowing that they'll just have the freedom to dig deeper has me excited. I really want to see how far Sugar and the Crewniverse can take this idea. Also, I'm assuming we'll finally get the chance to see more Emerald, please? Her literal 2 minutes of screen time was not enough. You can count all the shots she's in on one hand. You already know I'm going to make some theory videos on this before we even get a single image, but for now, I'm really curious about the state of the universe. They reference the Fallen Gem Empire, so clearly this is a post-future world, but what do they mean by evading the authorities? There's either A, a new alien race, maybe Sneeball, and they're starting to conquer the galaxy and give Gemkind a run for its money, or B, whichever Zircon won that election at the end of Future, got into office and decided to be morally corrupt, setting Gemkind back a few eras, which honestly would not surprise me, not only for a very obvious allegory, but we saw with Bluebird and Holly Blue Agate that there are dissatisfied gems out there who weren't rocking with Era 3. I really like the idea of Stephen establishing democracy on Homeworld, only for a lot of gems to go, remember when everything was terrible and bigoted? Let's do it again! Make Homeworld great again! I'll stop. But I do believe something serious is happening to the universe that demands Lars and the Off-Colors to embark on this journey, and that they believe uncovering gem origins is the key to stopping this conflict, only for the truth to be a lot more horrifying than they could ever imagine. Folks, we are in a brand new era of Steven Universe, just like I knew we'd be, and if I don't get my own indie cartoon off the ground or something by the time it rolls around, you can expect me to cover it diligently on this channel. Either way, I think the world needs more Steven Universe right now. I think announcing it this year during this particular Pride Month holds a lot of weight, since we know the world is crazy right now. So good on Warner and Prime for making this happen. I mean, I know to them they're just chasing dollar signs, but this will mean a lot to a lot of people. Steven Universe is returning to our screens in the near future with Lars of the Stars, a spin-off that promises new adventures across the galaxy, which will uncover the darkest secrets of the Gem Empire. And while a lot of people are psyched, you have just as many people asking, why Lars? He's always been a divisive character due to his treatment towards Steven and Sadie prior to his rebirth on Homeworld. And even though he's grown as a character, it's valid to be skeptical over the decision to make him the face of a continuation. But the truth is, Lars is the perfect character to take over as the lead protagonist for so many reasons, not just from a storytelling standpoint, but a meta one as well. I actually think that if you hated Lars because of how he behaved for most of the show, then you're going to get way more out of this spin-off than the people who already love him. So what better way to usher in a new era of Crystal Clear than to unpack why Lars has to replace Steven as the new main character, and what I believe Rebecca, Sugar, and Ian JQ are going for with this new addition to the Steven Universe franchise. Hit the intro! First off, making Lars the main character gives us a much-needed shakeup that fans have been begging for. Freedom from the Steven-only perspective. Throughout all of Steven Universe, we weren't allowed to see anything that the titular character wasn't there for. The only exception being flashbacks, which were still stories and information being relayed to Steven. While this led to instances of very creative storytelling, fans saw this limitation as a hindrance because while Steven was spending 11 minutes on Ronaldo shenanigans, numerous characters had their stories progress off-screen. Stories that seemed way more interesting than the slice-of-life townie adventures, including whatever Lars and the Off-Colors were getting into. Breaking the Steven perspective finally allows us to explore everything this universe has to offer from a brand new angle. Though I gotta say, I hope we're not locked into a Lars-only perspective. I'd love to see different points of view from all the Off-Colors and even the antagonist. Go balls to the walls with it. And assuming a lot of familiar faces pop up throughout this series, we'll get to see how they act when Steven isn't around, which is exciting. Let Pearl say f***. Now you may be thinking, we can escape the Steven-only perspective without centering the show around Lars. And while that's true, Lars makes the most sense thematically. As I talked about on Secrets in Steven Universe Volume 2, Lars is effectively an inverse of Rose. Instead of a gem who threw everything away in space to live more like a human being on Earth, he's a human who's leaving his home planet behind to live more like a gem in space. With that in mind, I want to see where his story ends. Since he and Rose ended up in opposite opposite situations. Is his rebel phase going to end with him as Homeworld's new leader? Or do the creators have something else in mind? I also imagine Lars will be in a similar spot to where Steven was at the start of the original series. Despite living with his crew for years, he still doesn't know everything about them. Much like how Steven didn't know the lore behind the crystal gems, despite living with them for most of his life. This gives Sugar a chance to incorporate stories that she's been talking about for years, like the tale of Rhodonite, alongside exciting revelations that could span the whole series, like meeting fluorite's various components and the different fusions they could all make up. I saw someone online describe this as a reverse Alexandrite, and that's the perfect way to look at it. Lars also doesn't know everything about gem culture. He knows even less than Steven, allowing us to learn new information alongside him, whether that be the various colonies, single gem versions of Homeworld fusions, or dark secrets like horrifying gem experiments that were kept under wraps. Keep in mind, Steven spent 2 years after Change Your Mind helping dismantle colonies across the galaxy and help Homeworld transition into a democracy. We got a taste of these adventures through the third video game, Unleashed the Light, which is canon. So Steven does now know more about Homeworld than we do, meaning there's very little we can learn alongside him. And if we focus on gems, they have all this info programmed into themselves, so we run into the same problem. Another way Lars will mirror Steven is with his powers. He does have Lion's abilities, but he never used them in the show, at least on screen.
Anything Lion can do, Lars can do.
Has Lars figured that out yet, or is that something he's going to find out?
Well, he will at some point figure that out and use it, and it'll be really funny. But, yeah. Don't worry about it.
I could totally buy that Lars never really used his powers that much when he was trying to get back home, putting him in a position where he needs to get better control over them, just like Steven had to. And I can't wait to see Lars use his powers. Bingo bongo shockwave beams! Screaming so loud he accidentally creates a portal at a moment where his powers would really come in handy. Just imagine how cool it'll be when Lars has a dramatic anime-esque awakening moment where his eyes glow completely white and he locks in. I also love that Steven now kind of gets to act like the Goku of the series, showing up to save the day when all hope seems lost. I don't know how many people remember because it's been years, but Steven can literally jump out of Lars's head at any given moment, and he's become so powerful that unless he gets nerfed like with the Rejuvenator, he can immediately get the upper hand in any conflict. From the Steven-only perspective, it means there's way less stakes, but with him on the sidelines, it really spices things up. We're going from never being able to escape Steven to probably begging for him to show up before someone gets killed. Keep in mind, shattering can only be reversed if Steven is around to do it, unless he leaves some of his essence with the diamonds like they do for him. But that begs the question, what happens if one or more of the diamonds are taken out of the equation? All of this is to say that there is still a very real sense of danger in this series. Lars is one of the only few characters who could take on a leading role while still having ties to the primary setting of the original show. Beach City and the townies that inhabit it can still appear if and when Lars chooses to visit home, whether that's to see his parents or check on his bakery. And I wouldn't be surprised if Ronaldo forces a space adventure out of him. Lars also brings a new perspective to not just Homeworld, but the diamonds. Steven has a complicated relationship with them because they're family. It's how we ended up in this awkward situation where they adore him and are willing to change for him while he's adamant on keeping his distance from them while encouraging their growth. Lars just sees the diamonds for who they are, and I expect he'll be way more critical of them and where they ended up compared to Steven, providing some commentary that I'm sure a lot of fans will resonate with. Lars also doesn't strike me as a pacifist, so I'm interested in seeing how he'll handle situations compared to Steven. Lars seems like the kind of guy to instigate an intergalactic shootout for the thrill of it. It'd be refreshing to see a lead character in this world who picks fights instead of advocating against them. We're not even close to being finished, but real quick, I just wanted to say that if you dig the thumbnail art for this video, not only should you give our wonderful artist Janky Bones a follow on social media, but consider supporting us over on patreon.com/roundtablevids. Most of the Patreon money goes into art for the channel, and if you sign up for just $1, you'd help us afford a lot more. I have so many ideas for videos that rely on commissioning a ton of art, so it really would help level up our production. If you can't swing it, no biggie, but if you can, the link will be in the description. Thank you so much. Lars is actually one of Rebecca Sugar's oldest characters, predating Steven Universe itself as Sugar created him and Sadie in our college days. Even his evolution to a pink space pirate was planned from the beginning. Lars is a character Sugar holds a lot of love for, and giving him his own show was not only a full circle moment for her, but Lars himself, and also Lars' voice actor Matthew Moy, as he auditioned for both Lars and Steven. Imagine auditioning for a main character and a side character, only to land the side character, who gets upgraded to the role of main character 12 years later. Crazy. When you look at the bigger picture, Lars' character arc isn't close to complete. The original Steven Universe was just the first chapter in his story. He was an insecure asshat who attempts to look cool and macho constantly blew up in his face. And when he finally had the chance to be a tough guy when Topaz had Sadie captive, he chickened out of even trying to save her. He atoned for his cowardice by protecting the off-colors after discovering his immunity to gem technology, but this one selfless action still cost him his life. At least for a couple of minutes, as Steven's tears resurrected him, but with a catch no one saw coming. While technically still alive with an extremely slow heartbeat, Lars is effectively a magical zombie like Lion, doomed to outlive his loved ones on Earth as he'll never age. Like Steven, he now exists in a spectrum between human and gem.
Their aging process is extremely slowed down, as indicated by the very, very slow heartbeat.
So they will die someday.
Slow. Yeah, they will die, for sure.
They'll live a really, really long time.
Longer than they'll want to.
Yet, we never explore how Lars feels about this drastic change to his life. Despite a handful of appearances as Captain Lars, his development more or less comes to a halt here. We see glimpses of maturity in Future's little graduation, as he's embraced his passion for baking by opening his own shop, and he's at peace with the fact that he and Sadie can't work out romantically. But that's all we really get. This is where Lars of the Stars gets to set itself apart from the rest of Steven Universe, as it'll not only continue to flesh out Lars, but explore his significance amongst Gemkind. Lest we forget, he was the first full-fledged human to set foot on Homeworld. He evaded the forces of an elite gem, and his presence in the galaxy is a threat to anyone with ill intentions. Whereas the crystal gems are the defenders of Earth, Lars and the off-colors are sticking up for all the little guys out in space. The logline for the series mentions that Lars is an eternal teenager, and his state as an undead being is baked into the logo, with the O and of being substituted with a skull. Hell, the off-colors insignia is a skull in front of a star. Also, keep in mind, I'm going to refer to Lars as immortal, as to us, he pretty much is. Lion's been alive for a few hundred years, so I imagine Lars is at least gonna make it to the 3000s. There's no doubt in my mind that Lars' arc here will center around an existential crisis as he's forced to come to terms with his immortality, but actively tries to avoid thinking about it by using the pirate life as escapism. Which might sound weird, but it was set up back in season 5 of the OG series. When he's Captain Lars and actively engaged in a dangerous situation, he's extremely courageous, but also a lot more cocky and arguably reckless. This is most evident when he encounters Emerald and commands his crew to drop the Sun Incinerator shields while she attacks, because he had a feeling she'd miss on purpose. Even though it all worked out in his favor, this was still a really risky move, and his way of handling it was messy to say the least, refusing to let the team in on his reasoning for the sake of drama and flair. He knew that if he could pull it off, he'd look cool as hell in front of Steven and Connie, which reminds me of how he desperately wanted to show off in front of the cool kids. Old habits die hard. Lars is still chasing after admiration and projects those desires onto this Captain Harlock cosplay. This isn't Lars Barriga, this is Lars of the Stars, and he's everything that Lars Barriga failed to be. I think that need for validation could be a really interesting character flaw that separates him from Steven while still being relatable and vulnerable to the audience in a way that only a Steven Universe character could be. Trying to be a badass won't always pay off. In fact, I fully expect the inciting incident of this story to involve Lars being full of himself only to screw up and face major consequences that will not only impact him, but his crew. I also think, while Steven was in a hurry to mature and be taken seriously by the crystal gems, Lars will latch on to his childlike wonder and hide behind his space pirate persona as as a means to avoid confronting the future and what the rest of his life is even going to look like. I've seen a few different people suggest that Lars went back into space because he couldn't handle being around his friends and family, as they're all aging before his very eyes while he's stuck in a body of a teenager. He thinks it makes more sense to be around gems as they won't age. They'll always look the same. By being out in space, far away from Beach City and surrounded by gems, he's essentially frozen himself in time. And that can't be healthy. And for the record, Lars is somewhere between 19 and 21 by the time we hit Steven Universe Future, as he at least had to be between 16 and 18 in season 1 of the original series on account of having a driver's license. Everyone's at least a year older by the end of the original series, and there's a 2-year time skip in between Change Your Mind and the movie. There are also implications that he was held back a year in school, so I would argue that his body is that of an 18-year-old's. I point this out because I believe Lars taking over as a main character is representative of a shift in demographics, as I'd put money on Lars of the Stars being at least TV-14, pushing it out of the realm of kids animation and into adult animation territory, just like Fiona and Cake. Fiona and Cake was the second time a Cartoon Network series was able to free itself from the shackles of kids entertainment, the first being Samurai Jack, and it was a huge success. Plus, this is going to Prime Video, which tends to host adult animation. And I've seen enough full disclosure edits on TikTok to know that the people who were Steven Universe kids are now invincible and Has-Been Hotel adults. Steven Universe is actually the perfect show to bridge the gap between these two shows, because Lars' character is built around toxic masculinity, and that's a prominent theme in Invincible, even if a lot of people just focus on the hype moments in Aura. And Has-Been Hotel obviously has two major things in common with Steven Universe: gay people and singing. United, these three will make up the Trinity of Prime Video cartoons that'll take over your social media feed every time a season drops. I also think Lars being the main character and being referred to as an eternal teenager relates back to the audience, as if this is a few years after Future, he'd be in his 20s but still look and feel like the person he was at 18. Something that a lot of people go through once they graduate high school or college and enter the adult world. You know, getting your first quote-unquote real job, where you're working alongside other adults who are vastly older than you, and it shows. They're farther along in life as a result. Having a family, a mortgage, and a lot going on in their lives while the only kids you have are pets. You're either still living at home with your parents or just moved into your first apartment that's barely decorated, and your hobbies still boil down to gaming and watching some guy talk about his cartoon theories on the internet. It just makes sense that this spinoff will be for everyone who grew up with the original show, and thus have the freedom to explore heavier subject matter as a result. In fact, I don't think they can do Lars' existential crisis justice if there were limits to how much they could dig into death and mortality. Nor do I think kids will be able to relate to what I suspect will be a huge part of his journey, which will be reflecting on his mistakes and coming to terms with the fact that he fumbled his one shot at a normal life. Which is why if you hate Lars and think you can't get behind him, then you actually may have more in common with the guy than you think. His flaws and actions will haunt him. He'll still be bombarded with the memories of mistreating Sadie and Steven. A shame that he ever behaved that way, even if these are still two of his closest friends who don't hold any ill will toward him. Even though he's changed and grown as a person, he'll literally always look like the asshole that he was before Homeworld, and he has to learn to not let that define him. We'll also likely dive more into Lars' past, which will give us a better understanding of his poor behavior in the earlier seasons, uncovering the source of his toxic masculinity and his need to be seen as cool. It wouldn't surprise me if he was a lot more like Steven when he was a kid, bubbly, optimistic, and hanging around people older than him, but unlike the cool kids in Steven, the people Lars were around bullied him and really screwed up his confidence, taking digs at his appearance and emasculating him at a young age, which took a toll on his confidence, explaining why he started drifting away from Ronaldo and gradually became the guy we meet at the start of Steven Universe. He seemed to have a good home life, but I feel like something had to have happened in his childhood, and I think revealing that he was rejected by the older kids in his community while Steven was embraced would be a great parallel that puts things into perspective. Now, I cannot stress this enough. These would be explanations, not justifications. I'm not saying some sad flashbacks would handwave his treatment of Steven and Sadie. We're all older now, we understand nuance. Although I do hope the show also examines both sides of Lars and Sadie's relationship a bit, because while Lars was too embarrassed to commit to Sadie and publicly be in a relationship with her, Sadie had some very, extreme extreme responses? Lars lies to her to get out of work. She literally sets his mouth on fire. They bond on a remote island, so she decides to hike their ticket home so the good times don't have to stop, which almost got them killed. They were both messy, and I imagine she's gotta pop up eventually, so better late than never to clear the air. But there you have it, folks. All the reasons why Lars will actually make for a perfect main character moving forward. And just because he has a spinoff doesn't mean that Steven won't have any more stories to tell, but that's speculation for another video. What if I told you that Lars of the Stars is going to take place far into the future? The synopsis for the upcoming spinoff mentions Lars and the Off-Colors evading authorities, but like, what authorities? Homeworld dismantled their empire, and co-creator Ian J. Q's been adamant that there's no intelligent life out in the galaxy aside from humans and gems. Which means that the main threats are actually coming from Homeworld again. And I believe it's because this show will actually be set during Era 4, with a new ruler who doesn't have all of Gemkind's best interests at heart, only those who used to be elites. I am on a mission to uncover the story of this new installment in the Steven Universe franchise before they can even finish writing the first season. And you can consider this theory the start of a two-parter, as I try to solve who will be the villains in the series and what they're really after. Let's dive in. So why would Homeworld once again become a threat to the galaxy? Steven achieved peace and brought the Diamond's reign of tyranny to an end, but as it turns out, the future wasn't entirely in his hands after all. The events of Steven Universe the movie and Steven Universe Future gave us a glimpse into the start of Era 3 and Homeworld's transition into a democracy, holding an election that seems to have the populace split between two candidates, Blue Zircon and Yellow Zircon. Yes, she's yellow and not green, shut up.
I can't believe half of Homeworld's gonna vote for that Diamond Stooge Zircon. Now Zircon, that's a face you can trust.
Going off the words of this amethyst, we can infer that Blue Zircon's campaign is likely driven by the promise of change, while Yellow Zircon's campaign is likely falling back on the good old days of Homeworld, aka the age of the Diamond's empire. Just about the Diamonds calling the shots. With this in mind, I have a feeling that Lars of the Stars is going to mirror real life a little bit, where yes, Blue Zircon was victorious and led Homeworld through Era 3, which continued to be the most progressive era of Gem society. But unfortunately, the pendulum has swung in the other direction, and instead of getting re-elected, Blue Zircon lost to Yellow Zircon in the following election. You may be thinking, but doesn't everyone love Era 3 with all gems being on equal footing and having the freedom to do whatever they want? And the answer is a resounding no. While a lot of gems were at the bottom of Homeworld's caste system were desperate for change and thus the ones likely to vote for Blue Zircon, a handful of episodes in Future showed us that quite a bit of gems aren't vibing with Era 3. In fact, they hate it. And most of them weren't even high-ranking gems. They just benefited from their place in the pecking order. Holly Blue Agate is constantly stressed from a total lack of order on the zoo cruise. It's unclear if someone like the Diamonds ordered her to remain stationed at the zoo and serve the Zoomans as a way to atone for keeping them in captivity, or if she stays here because she's completely aimless in life. But I do believe that aside from the go-with-the-flow nature of things, Holly's struggling with the fact that she can no longer have authority over the Quartzes. She can't bust out the whip or use her usual fear tactics, and she no longer has a superior to seek praise from. Aquamarine and Eyeball were shown to seethe over Steven's existence, as even though Aquamarine was already assumed to be a high-ranking gem, these two were celebrated on Homeworld after turning Steven in and testifying against him in court. Although we never got to see their elevated status on Homeworld, we can assume they did receive some perks beyond a boost in popularity, although I doubt Eyeball got that pearl she was hoping for back in Bubbled. But now their status means nothing. No one even respects their actions anymore since Steven turned out to be a diamond. They faded into complete irrelevancy, and that goes for all of the elite gems. Any luxuries they had vanished overnight, and I can't imagine that most of them got over that lifestyle. I mean, look at Emerald. She loves her ships, but with Homeworld's armies disbanded, we can assume she no longer has access to the vast catalog of vehicles she was once supplied with. Unleash the Light, a canon video game set in between Change Your Mind and the movie, introduced us to Pyrope and Demantoid, two Garnets who weren't ready to relinquish their status, and isolated their colonies from the rest of Homeworld in a desperate attempt to hold on to Era 2. It goes to show that if elite gems have the chance to act in their own self-interest, they'll take it. For a lot of them, it was never about the diamonds. It was about relishing in the things that other gems were forced to build for them. The gems who benefited from the Diamond Authority have little reason to be content with Era 3, and I think that's something Steven never really considered, as shown with Mean Lapis and Nice Lapis in Why So Blue. He couldn't fathom that a Lapis could genuinely enjoy terraforming in the same way a Quartz soldier could love a high-stakes battle. Steven has generally struggled to process that plenty of gems like having power over others, and while I'm sure some elite gems willingly turned over a new leaf and thrived in Era 3, a lot of them were repulsed by having to share spaces with gems that they believed to be inferior. Gems who no longer had to cater to their every need, on top of being exposed to more cross-gem fusions and other things that were frowned upon in previous eras. Unfortunately for those former elites though, all they could do is vote for Yellow Zircon. But again, I'm thinking Blue Zircon won this first election. As of Homeworld bound, the race sounded neck and neck. Yet, circling back to Why So Blue, we've seen that some gems might be partial to the old ways just because they never tried anything different. So, just like how the crystal gems convinced Nice Lapis to give Little Homeschool a shot after helping her realize she can find fulfillment by expressing herself in ways other than terraforming, gems who are inclined to vote for Yellow Zircon can be swayed to try something new and vote blue. But things aren't all sunshine and rainbows after Blue Zircon wins. Era 3 of Homeworld has always been destined to be a little messy because they're transitioning from having their society ruled by matriarchs who everyone was programmed to love and obey, to having one appointed leader and presumably a government that's structured like our own, especially since this was likely a concept that was introduced to them by Steven and Connie. Resentful gems will blame Blue Zircon for anything that goes wrong during our time in office, and I'm sure they'll keep tabs on any incidents pertaining to cross-gem fusions and former low-class gems fighting with former elites. Incidents that can be used as an argument for why Homeworld needs to return to tradition. This all brings us to Lars of the Stars and the period I believe it'll be set in, Era 4. Now I'm gonna make two assumptions. The first is that eras on Homeworld are going to be akin to presidencies and terms in America, since each era of Homeworld was previously determined by the numbers of diamonds in charge. Era 2 starting after the Gem War with the loss of Pink Diamond, and Era 3 starting with Steven returning to Homeworld as a diamond. If Blue Zircon gets re-elected, it'll remain as Era 3, but if she loses, her opponent's time in office will usher in Era 4. And I'd wager Era 3 will have been just messy enough for bitter gems to feel vindicated and push for a return to normalcy, or at least their sense of normalcy, setting the stage for Yellow Zircon to run again and win the next election, promising to restore Homeworld to its former glory. A new era that harkens back to an old one. Which brings me to my second assumption. If this series is set in Era 4, then we're looking at a massive time skip, something that makes sense in universe while also leading into the premise of the show. We have no way of knowing how long a term would be on Homeworld, but I imagine it'd be longer than the 4 years an American president is given. Gems don't age and have no set expiration date, so 4 years is nothing to them. But with this being their first shot at this sort of thing, I can't even see Era 3 lasting decades. And assuming this show is going to be like Fiona and Cake, where it's grown up with the audience, I think it'd be a little freaky if Steven and Connie dropped in as old-ass senior citizens or something, when those watching are going to be in their like 20s and 30s. So keeping this in mind, I think Era 3 will last around 10 years or so, with the show picking up a little bit into Era 4 so we can see the effects of Yellow Zircon's time in office. Opening the show up in the future will drive home Lars being an eternal teenager, as he'd look no different from when we last saw him in the future, while characters like Steven and Connie would be well into their 20s. Setting this in Era 4 will also explain why Lars and his crew have to suddenly evade authorities. Yellow Zircon has made the gems who serve her a threat again. I imagine a return to tradition on Homeworld means that armies are being reformed, new planets are being sought out to colonize, the caste system has been reinstated, and so on. The universe won't be free for Lars and the Off-Colors to travel, as many planets and checkpoints will be controlled by Yellow Zircon's forces. And this won't just affect gems on Homeworld. I could totally see the gems who move to Earth being forbidden from entering their motherland and other gem-controlled planets as punishment for betraying them. If they wish to return home, they have to renounce their new way of life and conform to the new rules in place. Speaking of rules, because we have fusions like Bluebird who oppose Era 3, despite it granting their freedom to exist, I can see cross-gem fusions being gatekept to gems of higher status through the new rules, arguing that cross-gem fusions need to have a compelling reason to exist. And Bluebird will conveniently fit the bill. Homeworld is falling into old habits and it's worse than ever. And there's nothing Steven can do about it because this time, a majority of Homeworld voted for all of this. And if they plan to simply leave Earth alone, it'll look like Steven sticking his nose into business that he was previously previously ready to keep his hands off of. And I imagine his status as a diamond would only complicate things as they're no longer supposed to have power. And this isn't like season 1 where there were just a handful of gems living on Earth that the diamonds were itching to exact revenge on. There's now an entire population of gems coexisting with humans on the planet, and the crystal gems wouldn't want to jeopardize their safety for something that's happening far out in space. That's not to say they won't be involved whatsoever. I imagine they'll be making plenty of moves behind closed doors, but it'll really be up to Lars and the off-colors to fight this corrupt system head on. I also love the idea of someone like Yellow Zircon being the introductory villain for the series, as it'd be a very different dynamic from the Diamonds. They were these all-powerful titans who could only be persuaded to change their wicked ways. Yellow Zircon is tiny and vulnerable, but will possess a scary level of influence that can turn gems against her adversaries and do the dirty work for her. It's a nice change of pace. I doubt she'd be the main villain, as Sugar and Jones Cordy wouldn't pass on the chance to design a new villain, but I definitely think Yellow Zircon could be used to get the ball rolling. That said, I don't think that she'd be putting these laws in place without other gems whispering into her ear. Gems who are not only trying to reclaim their status, but protect their secrets from getting out into the world.
I'd give anything for an order from the Diamonds, but all they talk about is
Gems need a ruler. They're lost without one. That's just how gems are.
The old ways of the Empire are obsolete, as are the diamonds. That's why new gems have to fix it.
The new Steven Universe sequel, Lars of the Stars, will finally shed light on the origins of the Diamonds. We know this because they plan to reveal it in future, but it's clear that Sugar decided to play the long game and save their ideas for a much larger story. And you know, this Lars show is already promising to reveal dark gem secrets. But here's the thing, how do you make something like this an organic, impactful reveal when the Diamonds themselves are just kinda there now? They renounced their wicked ways and have dedicated the rest of their never-ending existence to helping gems and undoing the damage they caused. Knowing how they were made would be cool, but that's about it. Unless it's vital information to have, because it's something our heroes have to stop from happening again. What if disgruntled gems who are desperate to reclaim the power they lost thanks to Era 3 are trying to create a new diamond? Black Diamond. Someone who, on the outside, is intended to be a ruler, but behind closed doors is nothing more than a puppet and a weapon. Controlled by a secret shadow government that's been operating under the Diamond's noses for thousands of years. And these gems are the true villains of this new series. And if you think any of that sounds contrived, just let me cook. So, the best place to start would probably be with the whole "they plan to reveal the diamond origins in future" thing, as it paints a much better picture of what this show will actually be about. I've mentioned plenty of times that the End of an Era art book redacts information about how and why the diamonds were created. It's the only part of this massive timeline chart of all the characters that's been edited to hide information, and it always felt like a sign that Sugar had plans to continue the franchise, even back in 2020. But there's something else in this art book that I believe I only covered once before that I imagine a lot of fans have forgotten or never heard about in the first place. And that's brief mentions of a scrap story arc that I believe has become the foundation for Lars of the Stars, especially because this arc seemed to feature Lars. To quote Rebecca Sugar, Jack Pendarvis, Tanika Stotts, and Kate Sang, with only 20 episodes to wrap things up, there were going to be some tough decisions on whom to check in with one last time. Future does a good job of putting the cap on stories of a lot of characters, and even manages to introduce some new ones. Inevitably though, some questions remain unanswered, and so many fertile story possibilities had to be set aside. The extra Lars episode would have been nice because we were planning to include some clues about gem prehistory and or gem religion, I suppose you could call it. Very, very early on, there was the idea of the final 4 episodes consisting of a cosmic journey into the origins of the diamonds and gem culture. There was a remnant of that in the Lars idea, and then that episode fell by the wayside, and a lot of these secret ideas went away with it. So that's something else that changed as the complicated, intense nature of Steven's own arc became apparent. A 4-episode arc centering around a cosmic journey where we learn of gem origins is not only reminiscent of Lars of the Stars' premise, but it's also pretty obvious that these scrap future episodes would have featured Lars, as the little graduation set up him and the off-colors venturing off into space with the goal of spreading what they learned to other planets. I remember back in the day I was theorizing that this was setting up the second half of the season to be a big space adventure because it just made sense with how Steven Universe set up arcs in the past. But let's keep reading. I believe the interest in the past and in diamond lore is something that everyone wanted to see incorporated because it would help us come full circle into the future. Come full circle into the future is a very interesting choice of words, and while it might just be playing on the title of the epilogue series, I still think it wouldn't make much sense unless it was referring to the next chapter of the story. I'm not sure how learning about the diamond's origins ends up being a full circle moment in that context, beyond another diamond coming into the fray. And for the record, I do think Sugar was plotting on Lars of the Stars being the future of the franchise pretty much like the whole time, ever since Lars was reborn on Homeworld. Revisiting the podcast and this art book for these theory videos really has me noticing how much Sugar wasn't willing to say. Like how she said the first time Lars uses his powers will be really funny, but then also ended that thought with, don't worry about it, as if she already had the exact story in mind, but she didn't want to yap too much about it. But let's get back to the book. We also bounced around an idea early on about Steven going into space for a multi-episode arc where he learns about the birthplace of the diamonds, but we ended up going in a direction that was more fitting for Steven's journey. We had a lot of time to watch Steven learn about his gem side. Future is about Steven exploring his human side, so keeping him on Earth felt right. With Future, we were originally planning on delving into gem origins. We always not do it. Gems are obviously technology, and they have their own extensive mythology, but we were having trouble finding the emotional pulse to complement that exposition. So you get it. We're likely going to get a reworked version of this arc that gets into the nitty-gritty of gems and Lars of the Stars, with the diamonds being at the center of this impending lore dump. But how the hell do we go from that to Black freaking Diamond? How'd my brain land on that? Well, allow me to introduce the missing piece. Homeworld Shadow Government. So here's the thing, I definitely expect Lars of the Stars to tackle things like corrupt governments and revisionist history, because Rebecca Sugar and Ian Jones-Cordy are both massive fans of One Piece. There was a point where Sugar directly compared the two, owning up to the fact that she draws a lot of influence from the manga. There's a lot of connections you can make, like the 4 diamonds being akin to the 4 emperors, the 2-year time skip occurring in both series, and, without getting into spoilers, Steven and Luffy both being pretty big deals. Even though that reveal in One Piece didn't occur until after Steven Universe was done for a while. Lars of the Stars is going to be even closer to One Piece than the OG Steven Universe was, since Lars and his crew are space pirates. They're essentially bringing Sugar and Jones-Cordy's fanfics to life. And it's interesting that Homeworld is shaping up to be a threat in this show because, as many One Piece fans know, the world government is a huge antagonistic force in the series that is hiding plenty of secrets from the world, ranging from the Void Century to a true leader whose existence is kept under wraps. So I imagine similar plot points could unfold with Homeworld. That's not to say the diamonds were actually second fiddle to a supreme leader we never knew about, but instead, I think we'll learn that elite gems use the diamonds in their conflicts to their own advantage, allowing them to get away with a ton of shady dealings and downright heinous acts. Think Squid Game, and now you had a group of pink guards harvesting organs from dead players under the frontman's nose, capitalizing on their circumstances for their own benefit, with a higher ranking guard being in on it and thus being able to cover the operations tracks from the frontman. We've seen plenty of times that gems who really enjoyed eras 1 and 2 tend to be on the more narcissistic side and are completely self-serving. Yes, they relished any praise they received from the diamonds, but I don't think they were all that into worshipping them as gods. They were worshipping themselves, and they really just cared about the perks that came with their status. I mean, think about it. There are so many gems who didn't see eye to eye with the diamonds who decided to rebel against them. So I feel like there's gotta be gems who didn't subscribe to their ideology, but rolled with it in public so that they can keep living the good life. Something else we've seen throughout the original series was authoritative gems evoking the diamonds' names as a scare tactic, like Aquamarine threatening to have Topaz separated and shattered by the diamonds personally. Hell, Sapphire showed us how easy it is to manipulate the diamonds directly, so long as you make it sound like whatever you're up to is in their best interest. Sugar said that gems like Emerald are a big deal because they're at the top of the chain, right below the diamonds. Everyone reports to Emerald, who then reports to the diamonds, meaning gems like her get to pick and choose what the diamonds find out about, and thus they're in a position where it's very easy for them to withhold information and hatch their own schemes while the diamonds are none the wiser, enabling them to play the role of de facto homeworld leaders while the diamonds kept up appearances, especially because the diamonds were always caught up in their family drama, and once Pink staged her shattering, they were completely consumed by grief. isolating themselves, and judging by things like the resource crisis in Era 2, let their duties at the gem matriarchs fall to the wayside, spending more time at the zoo or on Earth than on Homeworld, and instead of focusing on their duties, developing things like horrifying gem experiments. More on that in a sec. We saw how easy it is for elites to rule over other gems and defy the Diamond's orders and unleash the light with Pyrope and Demantoid. They were already in control of various colonies and forbade gems from acknowledging the existence of Era 3. Pyrope even believed that gems needed to be ruled, and she had no qualms with stepping up and fulfilling that sort of role. She was basically already doing so in the first place. With all that said, I can totally see the elite gems all coordinating with each other to manipulate both the gems who serve them, along with the diamonds themselves, in order to build their ideal empire, effectively creating a hidden faction within Homeworld's government that the diamonds were never aware of. For example, with the knowledge that the elite gems ruled over colonies, even if said colonies were technically owned by a diamond, I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that elite gems are eyeing planets for themselves and convincing the diamonds to sign off on colonization.
This planet's ocean is such a lovely shade of blue. I believe it's the same palette as your hair, my diamond. We must acquire it.
Very well then.
Now that she's gone,
listen up, y'all. I want that ocean to become my shiny new pool before this planet finishes rotation. Chop chop. Perhaps they were able to use this influence over other gems and ability to manipulate the diamonds and find loopholes in those the diamonds had written so that they're able to segregate and oppress gems that rank beneath them, ensuring the elites have the best quality of life possible while everyone else suffers. And of course, I imagine there was a lot of conspiring with gems, ranging from zircons to jaspers, to orchestrate events and ensure they had a particular outcome. Did a citrine see too much? Have a court soldier take them out in exchange for a shiny new pearl. An emerald can convince the diamonds that they deserve one. And don't worry about the court case. The elites already paid off the prosecuting zircon. The diamonds are gonna buy it being self-defense. I also wager there are more gem experiments beyond the cluster and 4-shard fusions. Experiments ordered by the elites and not the diamonds. I'm sure some gems would be more than happy to oblige with said experiments, because just like how there's court soldiers who love fighting or lapises who love terraforming, there's gotta be gems out there who worked on the cluster experiments and loved it, so they wouldn't say no to other opportunities that made good use of their talents. Testing gems as power sources for things like vehicles, weapons, all sorts of technology, forcing gems to evolve, pushing them to their very limits against their will, to the point where these test subjects would shatter from all the pressure. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that would qualify as the dark secrets of the gem empire, right? The secrets and lifestyle that the elite gems are desperate to protect, which is why I believe they'll have returned to tradition in Lars of the Stars. To recap my last theory on Era 4, I believe that Era 3 turned out to be pretty progressive under Blue Zircon's leadership, but it's still an era that's destined to be messy as they're transitioning into a democracy for the very first time, especially since the laws Steven came up with in Unleash the Light are pretty vague and thus exploitable. Definitely needs a solid revision. The elite gems who were screwed over by Era 3 would ensure the pendulum swung back in their favor, electing Yellow Zircon in the next election and allowing them to regain influence in Era 4, making Homeworld a threat again as they regress into old ways, which is why they seem to be the presumed antagonists in this new series. And it appears Emerald may unsurprisingly be one of the elite gems who's playing a major role in this series, as Rebecca Sugar included pink and green hearts in her Instagram post for the series, and she has a track record of color coordinating hearts to gems in other Steven Universe related posts, which feeds into the idea that we'll be focusing more on elites and those who reported to the diamonds, yet still held a lot of authority, rather than focusing on the diamonds themselves. It's still come back to a diamond, however, as I believe the shadow government, this hidden faction within Homeworld, would take advantage of this return to power and abolish their society's new democracy entirely, installing a new leader with their biggest and most dangerous experiment yet, Black Diamond. So there's a few reasons why I believe the threat of a new diamond would make sense narratively. It would allow us to learn the origin of the diamonds and the conditions required to create one. It'd create a sense of urgency in the story, as the emergence of a new diamond could act as a ticking time bomb, something Lars has to stop before it's too late. I also feel like a new diamond is the only way you could create a villain who isn't at risk at being one-shot by the other diamonds or Steven, without any of them being written out the story prior by bubbling, depowering, or, if they want to go there with the diamonds, shattering. Part of why the diamonds were such a huge threat in the original series was that they were unstoppable. Despite the crystal gem's best efforts, the most they could do against a diamond was bring them to their knees. It demanded a different solution than just throwing hands. So while I enjoyed the antagonists that came after the diamonds like Spinel, Bluebird, and I guess technically corrupted kaiju Steven, I never once felt as if the characters were in actual danger. But if rogue gems are developing a new diamond, they could ensure it's stronger than white, yellow, blue, or Steven, sporting some sort of ability that negates all of theirs, which could tie into the black aesthetic. Black is the absence of light after all, but when it comes to something like paint, black is when you mix all the colors together. Maybe Black Diamond is meant to serve as the sole ruler for all gems, instead of the 3 to 4 rulers they had previously. Maybe she sports a bulk of the other diamond's powers, while also harboring one unique to herself. The ability to rob gems of their light. What would that mean exactly? I'm not really sure. But since gems have been described as light with mass, I'm sure there are some pretty wicked things you could cook up there. You could also argue that the Mantoid's ideology in Unleash the Light could have been paving the way for a new diamond to come into the picture. As an Era 2 gem, the Mantoid felt as if yellow, blue, and white had become obsolete. And when technology becomes obsolete, it's usually replaced with a new, upgraded version that improves upon the original. In this case, a diamond that's designed to prevent emotions from influencing her choices, only making calculated decisions. Thus, she's unable to be swayed by Steven like the diamonds before her. And you know, she's supposed to be a puppet. Someone for the elites to truly control instead of just manipulate like with white, yellow, and blue. I think there are plenty of gems who would welcome Black Diamond with open arms. Holly Blue Agate felt completely aimless and desired nothing more than to receive another order from the diamonds. And I imagine she's not alone. Pyro believed that gems need a leader. They need to take orders. It's simply in their nature. And judging by Jack Pendarvis's comments about Future initially tackling gem religion, I'd wager that Era 3 may have actually had a lot of gems questioning their faith now that they have to live in a world where the diamonds aren't treated like gods. That in itself has me curious about what gems think the diamonds' origins are compared to the reality of the situation. Like maybe they believe the diamonds were birthed by the stars, when in reality, they're technology with a creator just like any other gem. If something like that is the case, then I can see the creation of Black Diamond being spun as the advent of Homeworld's true ruler, the god that gemkind is really supposed to worship, and misguided gems will just eat it all up. As for how diamonds are created, what happened to their original creators, and why it'd be imperative to prevent Black Diamond's emergence, that's something I'd want to tackle in another video, as I actually have a lot more thoughts on it than I initially realized, and I already yapped way longer than I wanted to in this one. So with all that said, I want to know what you guys think about all this. Do you believe Homeworld could have had some sort of shadow government or a coalition of elite gems that manipulated the diamonds and moved in secret? And would you want to see a Black Diamond come into the picture? Let us know in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going over on Twitter and Instagram at AllStrikeVox and at Roundtable Vids. Lars of the Stars might be shifting focus to the eternal teenager and his crew of off-colors, but that doesn't mean Steven and the Crystal Gems are going to vanish from the story without a trace. In fact, Rebecca Sugar is referring to this upcoming series as a sequel to Steven Universe, meaning that we can probably expect a lot of fan favorites to pop up. Gems and humans. So I made a list of over 20 characters from the Steven Universe franchise that I'm confident will make an appearance in Lars of the Stars and the role they'll play within the greater narrative, including gems who have never been animated in any of the shows, but have made their mark on the story through the games. Hit the intro. But wait, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Starstruck, an 11-minute indie animatic pilot that chronicles the adventures of a musician from Earth named Harper, who works as a PA for the biggest rock star in the universe, Azriel Phaser, getting into all sorts of musical mayhem across the galaxy. This animatic is being made by a talented group of people who have worked on shows like Gravity Falls, Gentry Chow, and The Boondocks. So if you want to see it become a reality, support their Indiegogo campaign that I'll link in the description. This is not sponsored, I'm doing this purely for the love of the indie game. Now let's talk about some gay rocks. Steven making an appearance in Lars the Stars is an inevitability, mostly because he can jump out of Lars's head at any given moment. Also, not to be pedantic, but the full title is Steven Universe Lars of the Stars, so like, you gotta have Steven somewhere. Going off that poster Rebecca Sugar released last year that featured Steven and the gang sometime after Future, I imagine she's interested in showing us where Steven's currently at in life and the path he decided to follow after leaving Beach City. I suggested before that since Steven has pretty much become the most powerful character in the universe, universe, he could play a role similar to Goku in Dragon Ball Z, where if Lars and his crew are in a pinch, Steven will show up in the nick of time and flex some cool moves. Though, like Goku, that doesn't mean he'll win every time, especially since this is Lars' show. He can help turn the tides, but he won't be a total get-out-of-jail-free card. I'm also hoping he'll at least be in his 20s here, in contrast with Lars being physically stuck in his late teens, and I just want to see what a canon adult Steven would look like without his powers interfering. Since Steven could only jump out of Lars' head by going through Lion's mane and vice versa, the iconic pink pet is a shoo-in for the series. I actually think we might see a unique take on a trading arc where Lars tries to learn how to use his powers by bonding with Lion. There's an obvious language barrier between the two, as Lion can't speak English or anything except feline, which makes Lion a very unconventional teacher. Lion is also the only other character who's exactly like Lars, an organic being who died and came back to life, being forced to live longer than he wants to. Although, I don't think Lion's really having existential crises like that. Still, Lion is smart. He was already drawn to Lars when the off-colors landed on Earth and changed her mind, and he's going to notice how Lars hasn't aged as the years go by. So I wouldn't be surprised if he started making an effort to hang with Lars periodically, like how he splits his time between Steven and Connie. It'd be kinda wholesome to see. Out of all the main crystal gems, Garnet is the one I can see having the most involvement in this story. She has a kinship with most of the off-colors, being a cross-gem fusion who was once outlawed on Homeworld, and is half sapphire. She already bonded with the off-colors in Your Mother and Mine, and whereas I can see Pearl and Amethyst enjoying their retired life and focusing on keeping Earth safe, Garnet would be willing to spring into action and get her hands dirty if it means aiding this extended family. I also think she could become a mentor of sorts to Rhodonite, given their similar upbringing. I really do see Amethyst making most of her appearances on Earth, as she's really attached to Little Homeworld and their school. This is her calling. I think her only real relevance to the off-colors could be helping them master gem abilities like summoning weapons, and especially shape-shifting. Otherwise, I think they'll keep things pretty chill with her. Like Amethyst, I think Pearl will mostly be chilling on Earth. Again, it makes sense that the crystal gems are in retirement when it comes to intergalactic affairs, and I think Pearl definitely deserves a break from all of that, given what she's gone through. I actually believe that poster Sugar dropped last year is a big hint at her taking care of Greg as he gets older and slowly losing his mobility. That said, Pearl still knows way more about gem lore than most characters since she served a diamond, and with the focus of the series being the dark secrets of the Gem Empire, I could definitely see Lars coming to her for an info dump. Moving on to the B team, you're crazy if you think Peridot is sitting this one out. She's one of the most popular characters, come on! They already called out that her and Lars never really interacted, and as someone who was really into the history of Homeworld, it makes sense she'd factor into the whole uncovering dark secrets thing too. Plus I could see her modifying tech and creating some cool gadgets for the off-colors. It's hard to imagine that Lapis will want to get involved in the overarching story, as she's always been someone who likes to, be left the hell alone, but Why So Bloom has shown that she's willing to embark on a mission or two if she's needed. If we dive further into the inner workings of colonies and terraforming, then maybe she'll be a huge focus for an episode or two, but for now, I'm assuming she'll mostly be on the sidelines. Like Garnet, if anyone from the B team is gonna get their hands dirty, it's gonna be Bismuth. She is a stone cold rebel, and if my theory about Aerofor is right, I believe she'd raise hell before she let Homeworld regress into old ways. And like Peridot, she could aid the off-colors with some really cool inventions. Bismuth is definitely the least developed of the B team due to her limited screen time in the franchise, and I'm really hoping they give her plenty to do in this series. Now let's talk about some humans, starting with Lars' parents. I expect they'll be in the start of the season and aged up a bit in order to set up Lars' aging dilemma. His parents are only getting older while he doesn't look a day over 19. It'd be nice if they're used to shed light on Lars' childhood, and as much as I'd love to see them become as fleshed out as Greg or even Barb, most of this series is going to be in space, so I'm not really counting on it. It'd be very weird if Sadie didn't make an appearance in the show all about Lars, even if they're not romantically involved, so I expect her and Shep to have at least one appearance in present day. Maybe Lars checks out one of their shows while visiting Earth. However, I think Sadie can make a bulk of her appearances through flashbacks as Lars re-examines how he lived his life before becoming a zombie, back when it was just the two of them at the Big Donut, and what their relationship was like when Steven wasn't around. Lars didn't sound completely over her in Little Graduation, so it makes sense that we'll explore his lingering feelings as he moves on and falls for someone new. It also makes sense to bring in the cool kids for a brief cameo, as Lars used to be obsessed with joining their group, putting on a facade in the hopes of winning winning them over. They'll probably show us where they're currently at in life and how Lars arguably has the coolest life out of all of them after he finally learned how to accept himself. Although given his circumstances, I guess Lars will always be a cool kid. He got what he wanted, just in a very extreme monkey's paw kind of way. Connie's definitely got to stop by and say hi in this series. If we're getting Steven, we're definitely getting Connie. Since she seems interested in pursuing a space-oriented career, I could see her working to become an ambassador of Earth. I mean, she basically already is. I'm guessing she'd be more prominent than most townies, but not as involved as some of the gems on this list. I already touched on Greg when talking about Pearl, but I definitely expect him to pop up during a trip to Beach City, and again, I think he's just gonna be older and enjoying his money and the quiet suburban-esque lifestyle he's made for himself. I can't see him playing a huge role, but it'd be nice to see him nonetheless. Rounding out the humans, we have Ronaldo, a character everyone rightfully loves to hate, but will likely have some relevance in this series as he has some unfinished business with Lars. The two were homies as kids, then they drifted apart and have been in an awkward place ever since. Now that Lars is a space pirate, I honestly really want an episode where Ronaldo finesses an adventure out of him, which leads to them fighting before having a cathartic reconciliation. This is their chance to make Ronaldo a little less annoying. Will they succeed? Probably not, but I'm still rooting for redemption. Reaching the end of this list, we have the homeworld gems, starting with Emerald. While I have theories around her that'll become their own videos, Rebecca Sugar recently shared the Lars of the Stars announcement on her Instagram and actually included pink and green hearts in the description. Sugar is known for color coordinating emojis and Steven Universe related posts to characters, so this feels like a hint that Emerald will actually have a huge role in this series. Which makes sense! Lars of the Stars, the episode, was basically a backdoor pilot and her only appearance in the show. We don't know much about her, but the way Sugar spoke about her on the podcast made it clear that there is a vision in mind for the character.
Emerald is like a fancy,
high class, super decorated,
high ranking, very important gem, which is not the kind of gem we usually deal with. And we deal with the diamonds. I mean, they're the highest ranking gems of all. But Lars really, I think that Lars made many enemies along the way, but then all of those enemies would have answered to Emerald, where it would just go all the way up.
Emerald drives like a flagship for a fleet, so it's like, Emerald's a really big deal.
I will say, I kind of expect her to be the first major redemption arc of the sequel series, should she still be an adversary. Just a hunch that I have that I'll elaborate on in future videos. And if they end up pulling an enemies to lovers on us, I swear to God, I'll lose my mind. Benelle's definitely going to make an appearance in the series because, like Peridot, she's a fan favorite character. They'd be crazy to leave her out. She could actually be a pretty valuable asset to the off-colors, as I imagine she can get them into all sorts of places across the galaxy due to her ties to the diamonds. Hoping them out as a friend of Steven is a friend of hers. And on that note, the diamonds will definitely be in this new series as we explore their place amongst gemkind in the new era. Though, like the crystal gems, I don't think the off-colors are thrilled at the idea of spending too much time with the diamonds, so unless they have major story relevance, it'll probably just be quick cameos. Jasper. You know I want my favorite character to pop up in this series, and I think she actually has a pretty good reason to appear, as it'll provide the chance to solidify that she's turned over a new leaf. Fighting is this woman's entire life, but as she said in future, there's no one left worth fighting. However, now that she's aligned with Steven, and I believe Elite Gems will be the primary antagonists of the series, she has new baddies to fight. Though she didn't have any reason to scrap with back in Era 2, but can finally get a taste of their strength here. Trust me, Jasper's gonna show up at a pivotal moment, and it's gonna be amazing. Last but certainly not least, I believe Lars of the Stars will give us the animated appearances of Hessonite, Pyrope, and Demantoid, the three Garnets from the Light video games. Hessonite technically appeared in Monster Reunion, but her arc happened in Save the Light, initially opposing the Crystal Gems, only to surrender, flee, and resurface as a reformed gem in Unleash the Light, now on her Vigilante arc. Sounds like the perfect kind of recurring character for a show about traversing the cosmos. Pyrope and Demantoid were the two antagonists of Unleash the Light, who weren't ready to relinquish the power they had over gems, and actually aspire to take over Homeworld as the new rulers of Gemkind, believing that gems need to be told what to do. And they didn't get a redemption arc by the end of the game, they just ended up poofing each other. So they're still likely holding on to their dangerous beliefs, and thus make for great antagonists to pop up in the show. Hessonite, Pyrope, and Demantoid all have voice actors too, so it's just a matter of translating their game designs into show designs. I'm rooting for them to make the cut. And there you have it. Those are my top guesses for who will pop up in Lars the Stars, and I want to hear yours. Drop your list in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going by giving me a follow over on Twitter and Instagram at AltricVox and at RoundtableVids. Shout out to Art with Coda for this amazing thumbnail. Be sure to give him a follow over on Instagram. And if you enjoyed this video, please sure to like and subscribe to the Roundtable with notifications on so you never miss a crystal clear. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. Peace! The origin of the diamonds is one of the most guarded secrets in Steven Universe. It's one of the very few pieces of lore that Sugar and the Creuniverse will avoid talking about at all costs. And I believe it's because how the diamonds were made isn't as much of a big deal as the price that has to be paid for creating them. There are two facts about Gemkind that greatly contradict each other. These facts have been reiterated outside the source material, but given that they come from Rebecca Sugar and Ian Jones-Cordy, I absolutely treat them as gospel. 1. Gems are technology, being once described as solar-powered robots, and 2. Humans were the first intelligent life that gems encountered. Intelligent life on the level of humans is a rarity in this universe. But if gems never encountered intelligent life prior to Earth, then what happened to their creators? Sorry to state the obvious, but technology has to be invented, and I don't think creatures like the spin-dashing blobby birds on Jungle Moon were the ones responsible for creating them. The diamonds and Gemkind as a whole had to have been created by another alien race. So what happened to those aliens? It's possible they still exist somewhere in deep space. Ian's wording seems vague enough to imply that other intelligent life could exist in the cosmos, they just haven't encountered gems and vice versa. But with gems spreading their empire across the galaxy, you'd think they would have encountered their creators eventually. Gems have highly advanced spaceships that can travel at light speed. You don't think whoever created them wouldn't have similar vehicles? A gem has just never bumped into their ships or any trace of life? It's possible they're laying low in another galaxy, or we could even have some weird time travel shenanigans afoot. But from the only glimpse we've been given of the diamond's origins, I believe that gems never encountered the aliens who created them because those aliens died when the diamonds were born. But before I elaborate, we need to pay some bills. As someone with ADHD, I'm not exactly a master of budgeting. Your boy doesn't have the best spending habits. Thankfully, that's where today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to save the day. Rocket Money is an easy-to-use app that helps you save more and manage your money better. I love using Rocket Money to cancel all the streaming services I used only once before completely forgetting about their existence. Rocket Money automatically makes a list of all your subscriptions so you can keep track of all of them in one place and cancel those you don't want anymore in just a few taps. They might even be able to get you a refund for some of the lost money. Something Rocket Money has that's really useful for me is the ability to create a customized budget within seconds. The app shows you where your money is going at all times and identifies top spending categories with insights on how you can stay within your budget better. It's a really great way to help me cut back on food delivery. Rocket Money also notifies you about upcoming charges and low balances to help you dodge the horrors of overdrafts and late fees. Last thing you want is a night out on the town where you notice how expensive everything is and check your bank account only to find that
there's no money in here!
Rocket Money has helped its members save up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features, and they've also helped members save over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. They're seriously a game changer. Give Rocket Money a try today and unlock more features of premium by heading to rocketmoney.com/roundtable or click the link in the video description. Thank you, Rocket Money, for sponsoring this video. To make a long story short, I think the most logical explanation behind the creator of Gemkind's absence is that their home planet and race were sacrificed in order to birth the diamonds. The redacted information about the diamond's emergence features an illustration of 4 gemstones emerging from a planet that split into 2. Despite the visual similarities, I'm not convinced that this planet is Homeworld. Originally, Steven Universe Future was going to feature Steven and presumably Lars discovering the birthplace of the diamonds, implying that it was in a location separate from Homeworld. Lars and the Off-Colors are currently exploring the rest of space, so it makes sense that they would have encountered this location in an area that they weren't in previously. The art book actually implies that Homeworld's current state is the result of a cosmic catastrophe with another astronomical body colliding with the planet, something I'm sure we'll learn about in Lars of the Stars. Back to the Kindergarten also revealed that it is nearly impossible to grow new life in areas that were impacted by gem creation, and although the populated areas of Homeworld are able to recover and grow plant life as seen in Future, despite their gigantic kindergarten, I feel like the amount of life force that it takes to to create countless gems and their powerful leaders would crush any chance of the planet bouncing back. We can assume that the diamonds are made in the exact same way normal gems are, just on a larger scale, hence the existence of tools like the Mega Injector. I know the type Spinelli used was made to poison planets instead of creating gems, but you can imagine that there are injectors of various sizes for various tasks, like creating different types of gems. Diamonds are shown to function just like normal gems. They're even vulnerable to the same weaknesses and can be poofed. Nothing about them suggests that they were made from vastly different circumstances from your average gem. We can just infer that they demand more resources. Homeworld appeared to have scouted planets with the proper conditions to create gems, which seems to also be the conditions to host organic life. A kindergarten is terraformed on these planets, and within these kindergartens, injectors are used to implant gems into the ground, sucking up all the surrounding nutrients and life force from the planet to develop gems who pop out from the planet's crust after a short period of time. This process is incredibly damaging to the host planet. It's a death sentence, as absorbing all the minerals and nutrients from the area causes a chain reaction that ultimately drives the organic life on the planet into extinction once too many kindergartens become active. Here's the thing, all of that is just for regular gems who are a fraction of the size of the diamonds with a fraction of their strength and abilities. So imagine how much of a toll creating a diamond would have on a planet. Even the smallest diamond eclipses every non-fused gem in size, and they're all immensely powerful. It seems impossible to stand toe-to-toe with them, so I believe their development would be devastating for the body they're made on. I think you get the idea, but where did the creators come into play? Well, there's only so much we know about them, but given that gem kind, diamonds included, were programmed to invade and colonize planets, I assume their creators may not have been the greatest people, unless something just went horribly wrong when designing gems. So whether it was greed, a freak accident, an act of revenge, or something else entirely, the aliens who created the diamonds ended up losing their society, planet, and collective lives as a result. Maybe their planet was already in jeopardy and the gems were supposed to help them find a new home, but they either got betrayed or wires got crossed and they were left behind. Maybe they didn't realize the price of creating gems until after the diamonds emerged and struggled to save their planet, slowly dying out. Maybe their creator was a mad scientist who knew their creations would doom the planet, but was too dedicated to the cause and went down with the ship. I also just find it compelling for the sentiment of gems, taking life and leaving nothing behind, to be all the more literal for their creators, leaving only gems and humanity as the two most intelligent, non-animalistic life forms out in the cosmos. Either way, I think creating a diamond means surrendering an entire planet, which is why creating a new one would be a very bad idea. But it might be something on the horizon, as I covered in a video about why I think some rogue elite gems will try to create a new one in Large of the Stars. This is the cost of restarting the cycle that Steven worked so hard to break. It'd be going against all the progress Homeworld has made as a society over the past few years, inflicting pain on a planet that's likely full of all sorts of creatures that deserve to live in peace. Imagine if Lars and the Off-Colors do end up encountering alien life that's as advanced as humanity, only for their ops to swoop in and try to turn their planet into diamond food. God, I need this show in my life ASAP. But as always, I want to know what you guys think. What's your take on what happened to the creator of the diamonds? Let us know in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going over on Twitter and Instagram at AllTrickVox and at Roundtable Vids. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe to the Roundtable for more cartoon content. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. Peace!